So I thought last night there were a couple of things that happened at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, which were, I mean, it was kind of an electric night. It was the irony of this to me, or coincidence, whichever way you want to look at it. It was WWE night, right? Because the Rumble is this weekend, correct, at Lucas Oil Stadium?
The Royal Rumble, indeed.
And so, you know that Tyrese Halliburton is a huge fan of pro wrestling, and they had a whole tie-in with the WWE. And somehow the Detroit Pistons thought this was real. Wrestling is scripted and fake, but the Pistons thought it was real, right?
They had steel chairs ready to go, Jake.
They
Believe it or not.
did.
Brass knucks, the whole nine.
So the game gets underway, and Indiana jumps out to a huge start. No Andrew Nembhard, no Benedict Mathurin, but the Pacers jumped out to a big lead, and, I don't have to go over all of it for everybody, and then the Pistons get chippy. And we talked yesterday about, is this a rivalry? I would say certainly it is to this point. And what's interesting is, as I mentioned yesterday, in the moments that the Pacers-Pistons, if it's a rivalry, like built up as such, would be because, or I should say, would be more so maybe for Indiana because the Pistons have gotten the better of them. The Pacers were blowing the Pistons out of the game during the brawl, and it looked like they were in a season that was going to be the best team they'd ever had, and then the brawl happened, and we know what happened there. The year before, the Pistons had beaten them in the Eastern Conference Finals. Historically speaking, in big moments, Detroit's been really good. Indiana has as well, obviously. But when they have faced each other in the postseason, it has been advantage Pistons. Last night, advantage Pacers. Did you see the halftime show, either one of you guys?
I saw the brief clip that they'll show when they're doing the fade out on FanDuel Sports Network.
Eddie, did you happen to see or pay attention to it?
I can't see it because it's not on TV.
Well, I know, but I mean, did you see, afterwards like that, like a clip that, sometimes I thought you saw the backhaul feeds of the television broadcast.
Nope.
So a guy comes out at halftime, and I thought Greg Doyle did a really good job of tying this into his column. It was pretty creative the way he mentioned it. But this guy comes out, and he throws two balls randomly into the crowd. And then the two people that catch him, he brings down on the court. And then he had two other people with him that I think were from the WWE maybe. So he has everybody throwing out different numbers. And he has his phone out, and he's saying, okay, multiply these numbers. And he's got everybody in the crowd following along. And he says, I can predict what the final tally of the number is going to be here. And so he takes the first person, gives him a 2-digit number, and he takes that. And then the second person gives a 2-digit number, and he takes that. And the third person gives a number, and he multiplies them, and he adds them. And then he has everybody in the arena look at their phone, and he's like, do you have this number? And everybody's like, yeah. And he's like, okay. And then he says to this kid, now just start typing numbers randomly into my phone. So the kid does. And then he goes, okay. And he says to the woman, what number did I write down? And she comes out with a thing, and she says, all it says here is the time is now. And he says, that's right. And he holds his phone up and points it to the screen, and the number on his phone is 0129252021 or something like that. And he goes, look, what time is it right now? It is January 29th, 25 at military time, 8:21 p.m. or whatever it was. And the crowd went crazy. And then I thought, wait a minute. When he had that kid punch in all those different numbers and then he handed him his phone back, he probably just has an app on his phone that he hits one thing and it automatically takes him to a screen that has that number already up, right?
I don't think so. I think the kid just did it. I mean, yeah, probably, yes.
When you think about it, I'm like,
Sleight
okay.
of hand is the magician's best friend.
The only thing that he had to do there was make sure that he nails it at 8:21 or whatever, because he already had that programmed in to show up on his phone, right?
Misdirection.
But so there was misdirection, and then in the end, he shows you a number that blows everybody away, right? That game last night had some misdirection because you didn't anticipate that the Pacers were going to be going without Mathurin and Nembhard. You didn't anticipate that Detroit was going to get as physical as they were. You didn't anticipate that a guy was going to be leaving the floor and doing a silent gun salute to the Pacers and get ejected. And you didn't anticipate that it would take Pascal Siakam having a career night, Myles Turner having an outstanding night, to be able to hold off Detroit. Maybe you knew that would be the case without those other guys playing. Ben Shepherd had timely shots. But again, I go back to, Jimmy, this was all facilitated by the aggression early on by Tyrese Halliburton. Halliburton was offensive. When Halliburton is looking for his shot, that opens everything else up. And what do you see but defenses on their heels, and then everybody else starts getting looks?
That's the player that made the city fall in love with him through that in-season tournament run and why the hype was real last year in the run to the conference finals. That's the player that people longed for the better part of the first half of this season, or at least the first half of this first stretch of play with the All-Star break just a couple of weeks away. And now you're seeing it on a more consistent nightly basis. I don't know what the full attribution is. I don't know if he's just feeling healthier. I don't know if he's managing things better, if it was a confidence thing. But whatever it was for Tyrese Halliburton, he appears to have, after the slow start to the year, rounded a corner to the point where, to that end, Jake, he's searching for his shot more routinely. He looks more comfortable out there. He's not as fearful or maybe cautious of putting his body in harm's way and driving to the lane. His passing is still as efficient as he's ever been. And it's the reason that the Pacers gave him the rookie extension they did last offseason to say, hey, this is who we want to build around. We want you to be the face of our franchise, and we believe that we're going to have a championship caliber window with you as the poster child for that. Now, you mentioned you needed Herculean efforts from Pascal Siakam as well as Myles Turner to be able to stave off a couple of runs from Detroit. You brought up yesterday, though, and our guest who's going to join us in the 2 o'clock hour, Tony East, has brought this up as well in the past, that there's not a clear-cut list of active rivalries in the National Basketball Association. It's not in this window of play for whatever reason. Sure, you still have your historical fights, but there's not really a true set it and forget it. Yeah, those two teams hate each other. I don't know if I'm there yet with Detroit, because you need playoff, modern, like last five years, playoff matchups that result in this bad blood, which is why I tend to divert to Milwaukee as being that. But you're getting enough of a marinade now, letting things simmer in this regular season series where it's like, okay, it's pretty clear these two teams don't like each other. A lot of work's going to have to be done by Detroit for a potential postseason matchup. Pacers won the regular season series pretty handily, 3-1, but you at least now have the bubblings of, okay, maybe there is something to this thing of Pistons, Pacers reigniting some flames, and it was certainly present last night with all the fragrant fouls and ejections, and Myles Turner, posting that Darth Vader photo after the game. It's pretty clear there's early indications that maybe there's a rivalry renewed here.
By the way, watching the game, a lot of times when I go to Pacer games, I think to myself, I'm very lucky to be able to go to the games and watch them, and they're very enjoyable. And I think back to when I was a kid and what a thrill it was to go see the Pacers. And before the game, I've never noticed this before. They have during the intros, they have kind of a ticker that goes by, and it has the names and the photo, the headshot, and the number of players passed. Not just the players. Like, have you seen this?
I have.
I mean, it includes like Wayman Tisdale and, Vern Fleming and, obviously all great players. Clark Kellogg.
You know who's not in there?
Paul George.
Correct.
I believe that would be, and we can get into this later in the show.
We've talked about this before, I believe, to a lesser extent. I know it's more topical
I know that Paul
now.
George has made comments that he feels like he has not been honored by the Pacers when he has come back. And I think that the Pacers have basically said, he's right, and maybe we should do that in a game when he returns. I know that Paul George's departure here was not one that was well received. I know that there's a lot of discussion of that. I will say when he comes back, I think he looks like somebody who is very gracious to the people, a lot of the support staff and things like that. I don't think he has any enemies within the building, and it looks like they're going to do something for him next year. My assumption is he is not up on that because he's an active player.
And that may be true.
Like they don't have Domas Sabonis up there.
I need to go back and look at that 2010s era and see if there's any active players in the league still on there. You might be right, but when you encapsulate it with the 2020s, you have active players that are still on the roster right now. Maybe it is just an omission because he's on a different team and he's still playing. But to encapsulate the 2010s and not have him there.
But who do they have from the 2010s?
David West and Roy Hibbert and Lance, I think.
Are they on that? I didn't see them.
Hibbert's definitely there because they have the mellow block, and Lance is certainly.
No, not the video. This is a new thing that I've never noticed.
Okay.
I don't know how to describe this. In the middle tier of the arena, like where there's like video signage.
Yes.
there is a scrolling thing that literally just has the round face of a player and then the number and their name.
Is it during that video montage? Like it's
while the
accompanying
video
it?
montage is playing, it goes around. I took a picture
Sure,
of it.
I know what you're talking about.
And it's mostly retired players of yesteryear.
Okay.
The most current player or the most recent player, I should say, that I saw was Jermaine O'Neal.
Okay.
So it's like Vern Fleming, Wayman Tisdale, Steve Stepanovich, LaSalle Thompson, Dale Davis, Antonio Davis, Reggie Miller, Rick Smits, Slick Leonard is there as a coach. Are you familiar with it, Eddie? I'd never seen it until last night.
It sounds like the video you're describing, but it's just on that mini board.
Like it's a scroll, right? It's scrolling
Correct.
across. I had always thought, maybe I'm always so focused on the video, that it continue. If you're saying Jermaine's the last player on there, I believe you. But in the video, they go to the 2010s, and that's the part that's always bugged me a little bit, because they have West, they have Hibbert, they have Lance, and it's like, well, that's great, but the best player from that group, and I get it. I understand how it ended, and Paul George doesn't have any leg to stand on. Okay, so I always look at that because they have the Pacers greats, and it does play while that video is happening.
Okay, maybe
but
you're right.
The video part's the thing that bugged me more. But again, I don't think Paul George really has a leg to stand on here, because he can revisionist history at all he wants. He left on such a sour note that I don't think that's something that gets resolved until after his playing days.
Jermaine did too, to an extent. But I think a big part of it is just that George is still playing for another franchise. But at any rate, as I was watching it, I was thinking about just the excitement I would get about the Pacers when I was a kid.
Sure.
And one of the things that was, to me, a real delight was my aunt happened to live next door to Scott Skiles. And Skiles was here briefly. He really flourished as an NBA player after he left the Pacers, truth be told. But Scott Skiles, the pride of Plymouth, Indiana. Plymouth, Indiana, by the way, the subject of our IHSAA Indiana Donor Network interview, which is going to take place just about 20 minutes, where we profile different leaders within high school athletics around the state, and look forward to doing that. I watched the game. I went home. Obviously, like everybody else, I did not know of the terrible story in Washington, D.C. until I got home, and then turn it on, and, it's surreal. You're thinking, oh, my goodness, and just an awful situation.
Yep.
Wichita, the city of Wichita, if we were going to make this, or not make this, if we were going to connect this in some way to sport, from a flight history with the city of Wichita, they lost a football team due to a plane crash in, I believe, Colorado in the late 70s, I think was when that was. There were apparently many members of USA figure skating. I don't know if that means that they were active national team members or within that program that were coming back from something in Wichita to Washington, D.C., or vice versa. That's irrelevant other than to say this. And that is that, 64 or 67 or 68, I don't know the exact number of people perished in that terrible incident last night. And you watch that, and it is terribly sad and terribly, confusing to know what happened. We may never know what happened, other than to say that it puts into perspective, when you watch what happened in the world of sport and everything else, including things that we're going to talk about today, puts it into perspective. And not lost on any of us on this program, of course, the heavy nature that just kind of hangs over everything with the realities in life. And we get to talk stick and ball sports for a living, and we can talk about race cars and things like that. So, we're very fortunate to do what we do. But it is difficult sometimes to come in when you know that the major topic of discussion for people is sadness or grief or tragedy or heavy nature. And then I remind myself that oftentimes people turn on the radio or the television for sports commentary to get away from those things because they need a reprieve from it. And I am very grateful that we are able to, at the best of our ability, provide that sidebar, whether it be from politics or, just a lot of heavy stuff that takes place in the world. I'd like to think that we offer a 3-hour vacation from that. That's not to say two things. Number one, that's always the easiest thing to do. And number two, that we do it well. I don't know if we do, but I think it's our job to do so, which we will do today. But I want to make sure that people are aware that we are certainly aware of that situation and that storyline. And you would say we hope for the best. I don't know what best can come of it other than to hopefully say that it does not happen again. But on the show today, we have a lot to talk about, including Jimmy. Tomorrow, I'm excited about this. You lined up a big guest for tomorrow, right?
Yes, one of our favorites, friend of the show, and the legend in his own right, Kevin Harlan of Westwood One, of Turner Sports, of CBS, going to join us to give us a little early preview for Super Bowl 59. He'll be on the call for Westwood One, extending his streak of consecutive Super Bowls called on the radio front. He always has funny stories for us, and I can't wait for that one. It's always a good time whenever Kevin Harlan makes time for us. He'll be joining us about 1 o'clock tomorrow.
So, and he has always been, the great thing about Kevin Harlan, and you have a relationship with him because you've had him on several times, booking him on different shows. But when he comes on, he has this, and this is such a gift that some people have that I wish I did. This ability for when you talk to him, you're like, this guy acts like he's known me forever. People listening to it would think he knows us.
Yeah, there's a certain level of charm with people like Kevin Harlan, and it is genuine, but you would think that you had known them for 30 years, even though they maybe come on once or twice a year. And, I've booked Kevin on a number of different shows, but also, in my early days as a broadcaster, he was always very kind to me whenever I'd ask for any guidance or help or tips from him. Anytime you get an opportunity to talk to somebody that's done as much as he has, reach out and see if they're willing to be helpful. So, yeah, he's a very gracious person. He is my favorite broadcaster, active. He's as versatile as they come. And to be able to get a chance to, just talk ball with him for a little bit and get set for the Super Bowl next week. It's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow.
Now, I'd like for you to explain your shirt.
So today's, ad nauseating Chief shirt, as we continue on the road to Super Bowl 59, is a parody shirt I bought a couple years ago. There's a show called The Mandalorian. We talked about being nerds yesterday, or at least I wore that nerd crown. So we're magnified today, but instead of The Mandalorian, it's a parody shirt off of that. It's the Pat DeLorean today. So Patrick Mahomes is center stage instead of The Mandalorian, a Star Wars figure.
That's the letter D there. It looks like it says Pato Lorian. I thought it was a Pato Award shirt.
Man, if I could get a Pato Award shirt like this, I'd totally buy it. But no, it's just a Patrick Mahomes to the same font as that show.
I don't know if Pato Award could do a shirt, though, that recognizes the DeLorean because it's an automobile. And
you're right.
But the DeLorean's not around anymore, though, right?
Would
you drive a DeLorean?
Yeah.
Like if you could get how much would it cost? I think an 84 DeLorean. They were only around for, I think, 2 years, 84 and 85 maybe. But or 83, 84, something like that.
Yeah.
But if you had a DeLorean, I'm thinking it would cost you $30,000 to buy a DeLorean, but it would cost you another $50,000, would it not, to get it up and running?
To maintain it, get it up to 88 miles an hour.
Yeah, because how many people have DeLorean parts?
Right. Well, but they did, and this is taking us down a classic rabbit hole here. I'll be brief. They've relaunched them, I think, as an electric vehicle. Like another company bought the rights to the DeLorean, and there's been efforts to turn it into an electric car. I don't know if that succeeded, but I do remember reading about it a couple years ago. But if you're looking for the original, we're going to need, a clock tower to be able to get up to 88 miles an hour, Jake. There's a lot of moving parts there to make sure Doc can get us to the future. Or back to the future, rather.
So I woke up, speaking of Back to the Future, great movie from the 80s. This morning, I got up and I had to do a few things coming in here, which weren't necessarily the most fun of things to do. There are those life tasks and chores that are not the most pleasant. I'll get to that in a minute. But I still, nonetheless, the weather's broken a little bit and life gets put into perspective a little bit. And so, I to quote Mike Damone, what does Mike Damone say, Eddie?
Which time, Jake? There's so many different things that Mike Damone said.
When he's reflecting on his day that started out good and didn't end so great. What's he say?
Woke up in a great mood. Don't know what the hell happened.
That's exactly right. So I woke up in a great mood and everything's going good. And then somebody sent me audio, and I'm not overly familiar with these guys. I mean, I'm familiar with them, but not necessarily their work. But I've talked to them on the phone before. Those Hoosier Hysterics guys. Now, I don't know, and we'll get into this a little bit more on the other side here. I'm going to have to address this because they put it out there, so now I've got to respond to this. That's how things work. But somebody sent me this, which I'll play again when I respond to it in a couple of minutes. But I guess they were talking about the interview that Isaiah Thomas did, which has gotten a lot of traction, a lot of discussion from the other day when we had him on the show. And one of the two guys, and I don't know his name, but he talks like Kent Sterling. And that alone can, and I like Ken a great deal. But,
as do I.
But I don't know that I would mimic the speech patterns of Kent Sterling. But this was mentioned, and I'm very flattered that my name was mentioned. Here we go.
Indiana legend Isaiah Thomas went on the radio late last week to the, what's that guy's name? Jake Query show on the local Indiana radio.
Yep.
clearly an interview that was planned for Jake Query. It was not something that he worked at getting. I love Isaiah for what he did at Indiana, but this was transparent for what it was. But one of the arguments that was laughable was him saying we're in a great place as a program because Trace Jackson Davis is starting for the Warriors and Khalil Ware is starting for the Miami Heat. And of course, Jake Query, spineless jellyfish with no balls to push back at the legendary Isaiah Thomas, didn't simply say, Isaiah, aren't you making the case why we should get rid of him? Because he's had incredible talent that's starting in the NBA.
Okay. And I'll give you my full response here in a couple minutes. I will say this. The one thing, and this doesn't usually take place, and I don't know if he was taking a shot there or if I should be flattered that he just assumed that everything is catered to me and I don't do any work in preparing anything. But actually, I'm the one that told you guys Isaiah was coming on. Not
that is
and more often than not, 99% of the time, he is correct that guests are booked. And we do talk about, all three of us talk about, we have a manner in which we prepare the show each day. But it is, in that case, I actually was the one that got Isaiah Thomas on the show. So it was not one that was I didn't come in 5 minutes beforehand, and maybe that indicts me there if there wasn't, in his eyes, the proper rebuttal. But I'll get more into the totality of it if I can sit up straight. And I'm not sure that I'm standing right now.
It's like Lazarus just walked out of the tomb the way you just stood up. Like a jellyfish, you don't see that very often. So I'm stunned right now.
Jellyfish are pretty, though, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
They're nice looking.
They're always
specimens.
used on the like the screensavers of desktops.
We'll play it one more time, and I will give you my entire rebuttal on being called a spineless jellyfish with no balls when we come back in just a couple of minutes. Big show lined up today, by the way. We're going to talk plenty about the Pacers last night. We're going to talk Indiana and Purdue. We got both sides of it. All things covered here on Query & Company.
Indiana Donor Network and Donate Life Indiana.
Uh-huh. That's right. So I don't know much about these fellows that say I'm a spineless. What was it? Can we play the clip again one more time, Eddie? I know that they don't want us to, but play the clip one more time.
The entire thing or just the
No,
isolated?
just the part of what he says about me here.
Okay.
In regards to the Isaiah Thomas interview. So we had Isaiah. What day was that Isaiah was on?
Last Friday.
Okay, so last Friday. So, listen. I was ranked 482nd in my graduating class of high school, which means I'm not a Rhodes Scholar. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I've got a pretty keen sense. I've done this for a long time, right? I've done it for a long time. I got a pretty good idea of the way things work. And it was reached out to me, not by my boss, not by anybody within this company, and I mean that literally and figuratively, but someone reached out to me and said, hey, Isaiah, would you like to have Isaiah Thomas on the radio show? Isaiah Thomas is the greatest basketball player in Indiana University basketball history. Indisputably. Walt Bellamy would have an argument, but in terms of totality of career and accomplishment, it's indisputable. And he also coached the Indiana Pacers. So when Isaiah Thomas, who I don't have really any personal interaction with, that's not to say people close to me don't have a lot of history with him, because they do. I do not. But when Isaiah Thomas wants to come on a radio show and you are in Indiana and Indiana basketball is being coached by somebody that was a teammate of Isaiah Thomas's, it is in your best interest to say, yes, Isaiah Thomas can come on. And did I know going into it that Isaiah Thomas was probably going to come on to defend Mike Woodson, to explain the case of Mike Woodson? Yeah, I had a pretty good idea that was the case. Was that said to me beforehand? It was not. Was there a game plan beforehand? There was not. Was there a caveat beforehand? There was not. But here's the thing. I happened to do a radio show on the largest sports talk radio station in the state of Indiana, and I do so in one of the 3 slots. There's like 8 people in Indianapolis that do for a living what I do, right? And the way that you're able to do that and be able to do it for, and who knows, I may find out a month from now I'm done. I don't know. I've been through that before. But the way that you're able to do that is because you have a general sense of what people want to hear. And I'm smart enough to know that what people want to hear is Isaiah Thomas or Peyton Manning or what you name a legendary figure in the state of Indiana. If they want to come on the radio, you understand that people want to hear that. And so I said, yes, I would love to have Isaiah Thomas on the radio show. Now, at the very beginning I had a general idea or assumption that Isaiah Thomas was going to come on to defend Mike Woodson. And he did. And I thought we were fair because, Jimmy, I thought you did an outstanding job very early on of saying, but Isaiah, I feel like this program is not any better off than it was when Mike Woodson took over. And Isaiah Thomas right then said, he stopped you basically and said, let me stop you right now and tell you why that's wrong. So he made it very clear what his tone was or belief was going to be in the interview. I've done this a long time. Part of the reason why I'm able to do this job in this time slot is because of the boorish nature of constantly calling out blogger boys and things like that and saying people are beneath you when you do a radio show. So it's not really in my spirit to do so. But when someone says this,
Jake Query, spineless jellyfish.
Okay. When they say that, I feel it's okay for me to respond. And this would be my response. In terms of the interview with Isaiah Thomas, I think that critique is fair. I think it's fair. I can totally understand and respect why people who are fans of Indiana, that are passionate about Indiana, that feel that Mike Woodson is not doing a good job leading the basketball program, would have issue with the things Isaiah Thomas had to say. And I understand why they would feel like their voice was not represented in me not pushing back on Isaiah Thomas in that interview. That is a totally fair statement. It's a completely fair critique. And if it is my job to critique the job of Mike Woodson, it is only fair that I absorb and take the shots when people critique me. Totally fair. Now, I will, however, push back. If pushback is what you like, I will push back on the perception or the statement that I'm a jellyfish with no spine. And here's where I would push back on that. Number one, as soon as Isaiah Thomas made it very clear that he wanted to defend Mike Woodson and explain Mike Woodson's case, it was very clear to me after having – and I'm not somebody who started doing a podcast 2 years ago. I've done this a long time. And one of the things I've done is probably lasted this long by more often than not. Sometimes I've erred. Sometimes I've been on the short side of it. But more often than not, I have allowed the person being interviewed, the interviewee, to tell me their story. And I knew going into that, people wanted to hear from Isaiah Thomas. They didn't want to hear from me. And I knew going into it that the vast majority of listeners that are passionate about Indiana basketball did not agree with Isaiah Thomas and rhetorically were saying out loud they didn't agree with it. So it wasn't necessarily my purpose, in my opinion, to point out what, quite frankly, was probably the obvious to the people that were listening to it. If you took issue with what Isaiah Thomas said, it's because you felt there was a very obvious counter to that. So I didn't need to point out what that counter was because you already know it. So I allowed Isaiah Thomas to be on this program for nearly a half an hour to talk because I knew people wanted to hear what he had to say, whether they agreed with it or not. And in terms of being spineless or have no balls, I believe that term was also used. These two gentlemen do know that I do have some decorum and I do have some spine when it comes to radio interviews for this show. For example, when they called me a year and a half ago, left me a voicemail, called me back, talked to me on the phone, and requested of me, I could say begged, to come on this program because they wanted to come on to promote an initiative they were doing to raise money for NIL to be able to give players money to Indiana basketball players. And they wanted to come on this show, and they wanted to talk about it and promote it and try to entice people to pay money to come down and spend time with them and wear candy-striped pants and hang out with the players and be part of the boys club. Because some people get to do that just naturally because they're professionals and get credentialed to do so, and other people have to raise money to have that kind of access. And when the phone call was made to me, he knows my name because he called me on the phone to ask me if he could come on the show. And when he did, I simply said, I can't have you do that. I can't have you come on the show because there is a level of decorum that has to take place when you're talking about something like that where money is involved. And so I can't have you on. And I set a boundary and a line, so he does know that there is a boundary and a line that I can set in terms of what I allow to be on and not be on this program. And in addition to that, I made the decision to not allow it on the show because, quite frankly, I didn't think necessarily that it was in the best place for this show to be linked with something that ultimately was going to get two people banned access from Indiana University because they were making a lot of people very, very uncomfortable in the way they were interacting with young people. And I would much rather be somebody who is critiqued for the way that I interact or don't interact or tiptoe with a Hall of Fame basketball player that's older than myself than to be one who is being critiqued and denied access even after raising money because of the uncomfortable nature with which I dealt with people who are young enough to be my own children. So, in that case, yes, I think it's a fair critique of the way that I conducted the interview. But to say that I'm spineless and I don't have a backbone, when you know I do because you personally firsthand have experience of when I have a decorum of what I do and don't allow on this radio program. In addition to that, I got this message this morning when I was on my way to do a blood draw, which I hate more than life itself. It's not a hard thing to do, but I hate giving blood. But I had to give a blood draw because it was time for my semi-annual checkup for my cardiologist because everybody knows the experience that I went through. But I look at it and I'm like, you know what? In terms of critiquing the way that I do an interview, that's cool. In terms of critiquing where I should have been more given pushback or offered counterpoints to Isaiah Thomas, totally fair. But in terms of saying that I'm somebody with no backbone, you don't do what I do for a living this long, go through the number of layoffs I've gone through, have the amount of resiliency that is necessary to do what I do for a living, and bounce back from a health standpoint of stuff I've come back from if you got no balls and you got no backbone. That part I take exception with. But in terms of being somebody who is still welcomed back at Indiana University or Purdue University or Notre Dame or Butler or any of the places that I cover games and have never had to ask extra permission, can you imagine being denied that permission even after you have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars and are paying athletes to recognize you and you then aren't allowed in? I'd be spiteful, too, to people who then have an access and didn't have to pay to get it. I absolutely would take exception with that. The critique of the interview, fair. The critique of me personally, not. That's all. But I do appreciate that Isaiah Thomas came on, and I think Isaiah Thomas is realistic also about the state of Indiana basketball. Indiana's next game is going to be against Purdue. Reality is it is a big one because Purdue and Wisconsin on the road, that two-step, then you come home from Michigan. Jimmy, they've got to know from the program top to bottom the critical nature that they're in right now.
We mentioned it last week. This is a fork-in-the-road stretch for them with all the games they have on the road in Big Ten play against top-tier competition that have either embarrassed them over the last decade or have throttled them on their home floor for the better part of the last 25, 30 years in Wisconsin. And it doesn't get any easier after that with Michigan, Michigan State. You have to play Purdue again at Assembly Hall here in a couple of weeks. If you are still in the camp of belief with this program this year, not the totality of Indiana basketball, but this version of the Hoosiers. I've made it clear I am not. I said it after the Iowa game. It's a wrap. I've seen enough. They do not have the measurements and the style of play to get them to the dance. But if you're still in that camp, show me a pulse these next two games. Go win it, Mackey.
My pulse, by the way, very good. My blood pressure today, 124/82. I'm happy with that.
I'm very glad to hear that for you.
My pulse was 71. Is that good?
I never know.
It was after the blood draw. I told him, I'm like, listen, you can't do this. Like, for an hour and a half after I give the blood, I'm psyched out.
Whenever they go to give me blood pressure, as long as they don't immediately gasp and rush me somewhere else, I assume it's good. I would assume if they're, okay, it's that over that. Okay, we're fine. But if they start to get clammy or panicky, then I'm like, okay, maybe my measurements aren't great. But yeah, for Indiana, you need to do something that you have not been able to do consistently for the better part of the last 2 decades, which is find a way to win at Wisconsin. And then before that, you need to find a way to win in a building that you've struggled at the last 5 to 10 years in Mackey with a Purdue team that knows they're better than you are, that knows they're in a better position than you are, not just this year and beyond. And, in regards to kind of put a bow on it, of what you mentioned with the Hoosier Hysterics folks, like, I'm all for people criticizing content, but when you come after people personally, especially people I work with, that's where I have a line drawn.
It was a fair critique of the interview. But here's the thing.
You can have decorum without getting overly sensitive and personal.
I'm wearing, by the way, boxer briefs. Do I need to prove to you that part of that allegation was not true?
We might need to start charging money on the YouTube chat. And I don't know. Eddie's shaking his head right now.
There's a backbone there, I promise you. By the way, a little backbone shown last night, maybe too much of it, by the Detroit Pistons, and something that I saw and went, wait a minute. I think we're going to hear more about that beyond just tonight. I'll tell you what it is, and Zach Osterman in 18. Just as, and this is a soft spot in my heart, the Indianapolis Animal Care and Control, which is at critical capacity right now, just posted on the Book of Faces. They do doggy days out where they take a dog out and take them out on a field trip, if you will, and then report back.
Sure.
Sunflower is a dog that went out today and just looks like a complete sweetheart, and they're hoping to get Sunflower adopted. And when you see it's hard for me, man. I see these photos, of dogs. Like look at Sunflower, Jimmy, on the day out, right? Just wanting to be able to go out and find her forever home. Plenty of great pets at any of your local shelters, and in particular the Indianapolis Animal Care and Control. Adoption fees have been waived. I ask strictly that, and hopefully they vet this properly. I know there are sometimes people with bad intentions, but if you are looking for a pet, I'm telling you right now, and all three of us can attest to this, there is nothing like a rescue pet. They 100% are aware that you have given them a second chance, and it is loyalty to the core and core all the way through. Last night, Pacers game. So you saw what happened, right? Isaiah Stewart comes in with a hard foul. And when I say hard foul, I'm talking both arms extended foul. And it did kind of actually have some shades of, not to the full force, but it looked a little like the Ben Wallace Ron Artest push, to be honest with you. But then all of a sudden tempers flare and a foul's called. Rick Carlisle was beside himself. And I didn't realize this. One of the officials working the game yesterday lives here in central Indiana, came over to the sideline and was like, Rick, man.
Went to college at Ball State.
That's right. And Tyler, is that his first name?
Tyler Ford.
Yeah. So who looks like Ollie from Hoosiers, strangely enough. But at any rate, he came over to Carlisle and was like, look, man, he's getting ejected, okay? So they eject Stewart. And then did you notice what Stewart did on the way out, Jimmy?
Mm-mm.
Gave the bird, right?
No.
Well, he did give the bird.
He gave did he give the bird? It looked to me like, from where I was, it looked like he was doing more of like a point push.
There was
with
a
his
bird
fist.
given as he was going down the tunnel.
Okay, but he turned around to the Pacers bench and did this, and I'm going to reenact it for you guys. Okay?
Remember, you're on the big camera up there, so if you're going to look anywhere, look up there.
He did this on his way out. He looked at the Pacers bench and went like this. Now that, Jimmy, this is radio, so I need you to do a little play-by-play.
There's a flag on the play. It's 15 yards, unsportsmanlike conduct.
That would appear to be some finger guns there, Jake.
He did 2 finger guns. I wonder if the NBA is going to step in and do something about it.
And not the fun finger guns where you just made a good diss at a party.
He mimicked the motion as if he was shooting a pistol at the Pacers.
Correct, yes.
Which I was thinking about it. I'm like, to be honest with you, for the first 3,000 years of existence, I don't know that anybody ever thought anything of that. It was like little kids playing cops and robbers, but it's a different era now, and the league itself has different sensitivities about things. You should know this if you watch the Washington Wizards play, and I wonder if, quite frankly, that's something that he's going to hear about.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. I mean, the league, all of the professional leagues have made kind of a stance on no finger guns, no hand gestures that mimic weapons or guns like that. I would assume the league steps in there, but it is funny that now both the Pistons and the Bucks within the Central Division are looking at their foe or rival, however you want to label them, against the Pacers and throwing all these accusations of the Pacers being front-running and only talking trash when they're winning and not backing it up when they're losing. They just beat the Pistons 3-1 in the regular season series.
What team is talking when they're losing anyway?
Right, that's the point. No one... you're going to have one loose cannon, maybe, not to give him continued oxygen because he's overseas now, but maybe you have a Patrick Beverley that's always running his mouth regardless of the situation. If you're up 20, you're down 20. But for the most part, yeah, people are going to stay quiet, Eddie, to your point, when they're down. But this whole accusation against the Pacers only being confident and cocky when they're up, well, the problem is for both those teams, the Pistons and the Bucks, you haven't really been able to beat them in any meaningful way the last 2 years. The Bucks got sent packing in the playoffs last season by the Pacers en route to the conference finals, and they just took down the Pistons 3-1 in the regular season meetings and won't see them again unless they meet in the playoffs. So, all I look at with Detroit and with Milwaukee is a lot of sour grapes about the Pacers maybe being in a better situation than they are, and certainly having the more recent success whenever they played each other in meaningful games.
I mean, it's funny. We talked yesterday about the NCAA tournament, for example, and quad one wins and the importance of getting wins, beating teams at the beginning of the year, they're going to help you towards, build your season. It kind of feels like the Pacers' schedule was arduous to the point where, and I know that it's ridiculous because at the NBA level it's a little bit different, but I'm not saying that they learned from the beginning of their schedule, but they certainly, I think we overlooked the fact that when they started out and, some of the games they had to play, it wasn't even necessarily opponent that was tough. It was the health standpoint. They chartered through the waters of not having a lot of guys available to them, right?
You took away effectively 2 starters from a year ago in Nembhard and Nesmith with at times throughout this year. Now, you can acknowledge the loss of Jackson and Wiseman, but and you could fight me on, well, Matherin's a starter now. Okay, that's fine, but a year ago, Nembhard and Nesmith were either high-level starters or high-level first guys off the bench that were going to be your leaders, and you lost them to start the year, and you had to figure out a way to solve the puzzle and stay afloat. They've done that, and now you have a stretch of 7 games for the All-Star break, 5 of which are on the road, and one of which is against the Knicks in what's a nationally televised game that I think is going to be a get your popcorn ready, must-watch.
So let me give
game.
you their next 10, because we were talking the other day about the fact of where they are with Milwaukee and the standings, and New York, where New York stands. Here are the Pacers' next 10. I'm going to give you the game. Jimmy, I want you to tell me if it's a win or a loss. Eddie, if you would disagree with Jimmy's statement, you simply raise your hand, okay?
Okay.
And I'll know. We begin with Atlanta at home.
Win.
Okay. At Utah.
Loss.
Okay. After that, you've got at Portland.
Win.
You think they're going to lose at Portland? Eddie?
Well,
They have
historically,
Historically.
admittedly,
Okay.
they have historically struggled.
And not to mention, Portland
At
has
the
been playing
Clippers.
good basketball
Win.
lately.
Win.
Okay. At the Lakers.
Loss.
Okay. Nuggets at home.
That's Knicks.
What's that?
New
That's
York.
I'm
Knicks.
sorry. New York at home.
Win.
Okay. At Washington.
Win.
That seems like a given, right? Okay. Then Clippers at home.
Well, we're at the All-Star break at that point. Do you want to pause or do you want to?
Okay. So we'll go. I said 10. We'll go to the break. So that you have them then at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You have them rounding out at 5 and 2. Eddie, you have them at 4 and 3, right?
Atlanta win, Utah win, Portland L, Clippers L, Lakers win, Knicks win.
You said Portland loss, right?
Yeah.
Did you say Clippers loss?
Portland loss.
I don't think they lose. My
Clippers
point being,
loss.
I don't think they lose in Portland.
I don't
okay?
5 and 2.
But I think they could go. I think 5 and 2 or 6 and 1. You take 4 and 3. I think you feel like you slid a little bit.
I would agree.
But I just think that a big part of it is their health. Admittedly, Nembhard out now. Did you hear the injury to Nembhard? What it was listed as?
Yes.
What was the terminology on that, Eddie? I'd never heard of this before.
It was a thoracic.
Thoracic. Doesn't that? What does thoracic mean? Is that means like spine, doesn't it?
Yes.
Like a thorax? What's a thorax?
I was thinking more a Barbasol can with DNA in it from dinosaurs, personally.
Seriously.
Thoracic spine sprain.
Well, you know what? That's apparently what I have.
Well, you
no,
can't
you
have a
to
sprain.
exactly. You got to have the spine to be able to have the sprain, Jake.
He's like a jellyfish, right? Okay, so he had and then I heard, but it's not overly serious. Can you have spine sprain and not have it be serious?
I think if you're at a level of athleticism, then yes, it's fine. For the common man like yours truly, no, I think I'm out for a couple of months.
That feels beyond serious, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's like a spine sprain. What exactly is that? And I'm not even making light of it. What is it? Can you look that up, Eddie? What a spine sprain is?
It's when ligaments, the tough bands of tissue that hold bones together, are torn from their attachments.
Yeah, I'm out for a year.
Yeah.
The rehab's going to be rough.
Both of these can result from a sudden injury or from gradual overuse.
Do you think he sneezed? Do you think that's it? He sneezed hard? Gradual
when the thoracic
overuse.
or lumbar spine is sprained.
Hold on. What is gradual? How do you gradually overuse something? You either overuse it or you are
improper
gradual
form
about it.
when you lift?
Huh?
Like if you're using improper form when lifting?
Yeah, but that's not gradual. all of a
But
sudden
it
one
would
day
build up over
it's
time.
gone, right?
I don't think it would just be like that.
Like, you
It
don't
would just build
gradually
up.
blow out a tire on the interstate. You're driving 1 minute, cruising right along. Next minute, holy cow, what just happened?
Maybe it's if you keep driving on it, that gradually
I'm
gets to the point
betting
of no
somebody
return.
that has a spine sprain doesn't think, this has been gradual. I'll bet
I
all of a
think it
sudden
is.
1 minute they just go, holy cow.
I'm sure it's one of those deals where you
I don't
wake
know
up one
because
day
I have
and
no
you're
spine. I can't relate
No,
to any of
you're
it.
sore.
I bet it
and-
does eventually snap, but I think the gradual part is, I'm picking up this heavy boulder every day. This is fun. Oh, and day 35, wow, man, my spine really hurts.
Doesn't SpongeBob have a friend that's a jellyfish?
He
Or is
hunts
it a
jellyfish, or
starfish?
he hunts
Starfish.
jellyfish. Starfish is his friend.
So he doesn't have jellyfish friend.
No,
Because
He
that
like-
would have made one of you guys. So that makes these fellas SpongeBob. If they're
To
hunting
some
me,
extent, yeah.
if I'm the jellyfish and they're hunting me down, then
Yes.
they're SpongeBob.
yes.
And look at that. The most common injury result is from excess weight bearing or lifting.
The look at that had a lot of pride behind it. I don't know if you meant that, but that sounded like I'm Eddie Garrison. And
That's
I got
no
that one right.
gradual. That means 1 minute you're fine, the next minute you sprained it.
Excess lifting, Jake. That doesn't just happen. It happens over time.
Okay. So what we're getting at is Andrew Nimhart's Hulk Hogan. He's Tom Zapanzich. He's just sitting around lifting tractors, and all of a sudden he
Oh, yeah.
sprained his spine.
Hurt my spine, brother.
Okay. Eddie, when's the last time you went lifting?
That's a good question. I've never been a big lift guy. I've always been.
Oh, I couldn't tell.
Oh, thanks.
Zach, is it
This is
Osterman
why
or
you're.
Osterman?
This is why you're spineless, Jake.
That's right. Zach Osterman, by the way, talking about Indiana, joins us next. 1 o'clock hour in Indianapolis. For that matter, it's the 1 o'clock hour everywhere in the Eastern time zone. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, he is the beat writer of Indiana University Athletics for the Indianapolis Star. Zach
Osterman
joins us on the show. Zach, I'll begin with this. Indiana's got a two-step. Purdue and Wisconsin. Then they come back home and they take on Michigan and Dusty May. If Indiana is to drop those two games, is Indiana going to put Mike Woodson in the position of having to stand on the sidelines and hearing one side of the arena chanting that he needs to be fired and the other side chanting Dusty May's name?
I don't have an answer for you other than to say I don't think it's unfair to ask the question.
Yeah.
And I don't mean you to me so much as I mean in general that I think, listen, I'm going to be honest. Like I've covered Indiana basketball for a long time, and I think you and I, Jake, have known each other for a while, and I've done these with you going back years, and I've always generally, I think I would hope anyway, tried to be a bit of a voice of reason and a bit of a voice of calm, and to not sort of get into the more alarmist kind of attitudes that can sometimes flow through college sports, which is totally normal, but you try to sort of reel them back in where you can. I don't think I've ever seen Assembly Hall the way I've seen it this season. There was, early in the season, it was quiet. It was, the attendance was very low. Fan engagement was pretty difficult to come by. Obviously, some of that's who Indiana's playing, but still. Then there was, of course, all the kind of, and I don't think it's unfair to call it ugliness around the Illinois game. And I'm not even necessarily passing judgment on anyone's behavior, the fans' behavior, whatever. Just it's an ugly scene when you have your fans chanting at a game that they want the coach on the sideline fired. I don't think that's unfair. And then the Maryland game on what day was that? Even Sunday? I've kind of lost. I'm at that point in the season where I lose all track of days and I just measure things by when the next game is. Was easily the best atmosphere I've seen in that building in 2 years, in terms of fans really intensely engaging with the game, passionate, loud, spurring on the comeback, very much behind the team, and then Indiana loses the game. If Indiana does lose these next two, as obviously the odds and the stats and so forth would suggest is the likeliest outcome, I would be fascinated, and though perhaps, I don't know how many people would be eager to find out what the atmosphere would look like for that Michigan game. And so I don't think it's a completely unfair question to be asked, at least in a broad strokes way.
Yeah, obviously, Zach, I'm asking it like 70% creative prognostication, 30% like, gosh, are we really at this point? You know what I mean? Like it's the first time that it feels like, not the first time, but for the last month, there has been a shift where, and I guess I'll go with this, and then we can get to the brass tacks of the season itself. It feels to me like at this point, Zach, even with, and I'm well aware of the fact that Mike Woodson and Quinn Buckner are very close, and Quinn Buckner is on the Board of Trustees at Indiana University and, has the ultimate say on the Board of Trustees, and his tenure, I know all those facts. We all do at this point. But it feels to me like the very first time in the tenure that they have now crossed a point where, barring a winning 90% of their remaining games deep NCAA tournament run, that even Mike Woodson knows this is it. Is that too extreme of me to say?
I obviously don't know for certain. Otherwise, you'd read about it in the pages of my newspaper, or at least on the website. I guess I don't know how many people are reading the pages of the newspaper anymore, the web pages of the newspaper, perhaps. But I would say that, again, and listen, some of this is a beat writer wanting to hedge and not wanting to pass opinion off as fact and things like that. But again, I think it would be hard to escape that feeling. And that's where I kind of go back to the atmospheres inside Assembly Hall this season. Part of what, I would frankly admit that, like, I was a little bit startled by the way everything looked and felt around that Illinois game. And it was because I'd spent a lot of the season remarking at just how sort of subdued, almost to the point of apathy, the arena had been up to that point in the season. And the idea that suddenly sort of it's like it got shaken to life, but in a very angry way. I think that when you do that, when you go through that, Indiana's lost, obviously kind of been on a little bit of a slide here, the Ohio State game notwithstanding. I think there's probably dwindling, if any, firm belief anymore that Indiana is going to be able to win enough of the games it's got left on the schedule that it needs to win to change kind of the course of its season as things stand. I don't think, and I know I'm being evasive, forgive me, but I don't think that is an unfair read of the situation. As somebody like you who has been around this program often enough to know what it looks like when it reaches a point where it feels like there's, things are just untenable with the status quo anymore.
Zach Osman is our guest, covers all things IU for the Indy Star. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Zach, looking to Purdue tomorrow, I think back to their last win at Mackey a couple seasons ago where you looked at players on that roster. You thought, man, Jalen Hood-Schifino, maybe he has a great game, and Trace Jackson-Davis, maybe he plays really well. Maybe they could get this win finally at Purdue and get a nice IUW added to that ledger. I look at this roster, I'm at a loss to figure out who I could point to and say, well, he could have a good game or he could have a breakout performance and they could surprise some folks and turn the season around with a win at Mackey tomorrow night. When you look at this roster, if they're going to get it done tomorrow, who is it that is the headline player or headline players of your piece if you're doing a game summary about an IU win at Mackey Arena tomorrow night?
I think there's a couple. First of all, this is one area where as good as Trey Kaufman-Renn has been, if Malik Reneau is healthier, and now he's had kind of a full week to, keep rehabbing his injury, keep getting kind of his game conditioning back and all that sort of thing. It does feel like Indiana's kind of got two in the post where Purdue's just got one. And maybe you can leverage that in certain situations. I know, too big basketball has kind of become the bane of some IU fans' existence, but that doesn't mean there aren't times when it works. That doesn't mean there aren't times when it is useful, when, maybe you can get in a situation where Purdue's got to roll Kaufman-Renn out for a rest, and Indiana can go back to Oumar Ballo, for example, and really sort of use his size, give itself kind of an anchor point offensively in the paint, sort of a foothold, if you will. I think the other piece of it is, and this is simplistic, but sometimes like the biggest keys to a game are, Indiana has got to have somebody, whether it's Miles Rice or Trey Galloway or somebody else, that can, in essence, cancel out Braden Smith. And that's not to say Indiana's going to hold Braden Smith to a bad game. I don't think you can count on that, especially at Mackey. But if you can get to the end of the game and maybe you feel like Galloway and Rice together, between points, rebounds, assists, influence on the game, maybe they've matched Smith, or even because it's two players instead of one, maybe they collectively have had a slightly better game than him, then I think Indiana's got, kind of a chance. What I would say is I don't know that Indiana needs to hit a ton of threes in this game if it can defend the three-point line. Now, that's tricky because Purdue obviously has multiple players, again, especially at home, that can hurt you from there very easily. And especially if you can't kind of get a hold of Braden Smith, that's where if Braden Smith starts playing well, those shots start falling for other players because he's the one creating them and he knows how. But if Indiana's going to win this game, I think there's an extent to which it's got to win in the post, where I think you could argue maybe it can create some advantages for itself over the course of a 40-minute game. And it's got to have, if not from one player, then certainly no more than two players, kind of a collective point guard performance that matches or betters Braden Smith. Now, those are easier said than done. I recognize that. But, to my mind, those are probably the two places I would start.
Zach, you highlighted the chanting for Mike Woodson's job from the student section. We've seen the commentary being on social media. Occasionally I've been critical, as is Jake, of what Mike Woodson's doing down there. Do you think the noise, be it against the players, be it against the coaches, be it against anybody involved with the program, has gotten to them? Not like gotten back to them, but like has gotten to them in terms of frustrated and caused more turmoil or anxiety throughout the course of the last couple of weeks?
No, I mean, absolutely. Yes. I don't think that's unfair. And I think this is sort of one of those things like when you talk to fans about players playing hurt or playing injured and they say, well, they're paid all this money. And it's sort of like, that's great. But, money doesn't hem a torn hamstring. Money doesn't fix a broken hand. And whether it's players or coaches now, you maybe say the same thing that, well, they're paid for the criticism, whatever. Yeah, but they are, at the end of the day, still human beings. And no matter how much you were paid, what I usually say to people is, how do you think you would react or respond or behave or endure under the same circumstances? And I'm not, it's a fine line to walk because fans should be allowed to express their displeasure. Obviously, there are countless, this is not an IU specific thing. There are countless cases over virtually all sports of fans going too far, their passion overriding their judgment, whatever. I'm not condoning that. But whether it's stuff that we can all agree is, over the line, or it's stuff that's like fair criticism and fair frustration just being vented sort of emotionally out into the slipstream, I don't think there's any question that it has kind of permeated, IU's locker room or basketball office or whatever. Because listen, again, how could it not? They are still human beings, and it's not it's not going to just sort of not affect you, if you understand what I'm saying.
Zach, do you think that and I don't mean from a fan standpoint, internally, do you think there would be as much scrutiny as to the immediacy or as much discussion as to the immediacy of a coaching change in the basketball program for Mike Woodson if Curt Cignetti had gone 3-8?
No, I don't. I mean, listen, I think football has probably provided a little shelter to some extent, but I mean, I was the one that had to go ask the question and try and confirm, last year that Indiana intended to keep Mike Woodson through last offseason. So it's not like, and again, we can have a debate over, I know you said you're not asking from a fan perspective. We can have a debate over whether that was justified or whatever, some of that frustration. But the climate existed around, sort of a concern for the direction of this program long before Curt Cignetti coached a game.
Fair.
If anything, it has probably helped a little bit in terms of, it at least kind of took some of the attention off and took, it probably even still creates a little bit of shelter as people start to get excited about what Indiana might round itself into here in the spring and summer seasons. But basketball, even as much as IU football's had success in the last 12 months, even as much as college football is growing in popularity year on year, there is an extent to which, culturally speaking, IU basketball will always be its own thing down here. And it's not like there wasn't already, sort of, I don't know if you want to say the climate or the groundwork. I'm not sure what the best word is, but it's not like this wasn't already something that was being discussed, something that was being debated, something that was very clearly kind of dominating the discourse, long before August 31st against Florida International.
The Zach Osterman is our guest, by the way, from the Indianapolis Star. He's the IU athletics beat writer. Indiana getting set for Purdue. That game going to be tomorrow night in Mackey. Zach, I just, when I look at it at the end of the game against Maryland, for example, it almost looked to me, and I'm going off one moment, which is probably unfair, but I see Luke Goody like stopping Mike Woodson and turning him around to say like, hey, you still got to go to the handshake line. And then I realized that maybe part of the problem for Indiana is the fact that seemingly the guy that is the leader or the elder statesman for the roster, or the one that I've seen like getting in guys' ears on the sidelines and trying to rally them together, is a guy that is a transfer that is in his final year that joined the program 8 months ago. And I know culture is an overused word, but is there a culture problem of immaturity?
I don't know if I would go that far, because I'd also point out like Anthony Leal has been kind of right there alongside Luke Goody, and nobody, I mean, it would be at this point, nigh on impossible to be around Indiana basketball longer than Anthony Leal has, if you want to go back to his time growing up in Bloomington. I also think generally, like, because I get a decent amount, as you'd imagine, of reaction and response covering games and writing out different things. And I get one of the sort of consistent lines I get from fans is that, these transfers are just quote unquote mercenaries that have no loyalty to the school or whatever. And my response is always, well, there are plenty of other programs out there taking in multiple transfers per year. There are plenty of programs in the Big Ten, a couple of pretty successful ones this year who all but had to remake their rosters through the portal last year. I don't remember how many players Michigan got back. It was a small number, less than a half dozen. I think Illinois only got the one. And that has clearly not affected their ability to build a winning, if you want to use that word, a winning culture, a functional roster, a cohesive unit that is coming together and winning games at a pretty consistent clip, the kinds of games Indiana has been struggling to win. I don't think you can necessarily just sort of reduce it down to if one of the biggest voices in the locker room is a transfer, that locker room must have problems. Because number one, I would argue there are other voices in that locker room that are loud, that have been around a long time. Trey Galloway is another one. And number two, there are plenty of programs around the country that are turning to transfers for leadership, and it's working fine. I think it's just got to be, I think there are more layers to it than just that, if that makes sense.
Indy Stars, Zach Osterman is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Zach, let's play this out for a second. Let's say that over their next four, they go 1-3. The win is at home against Michigan, but the losses are Purdue and Wisconsin, and then on the road at Michigan State. At that point for me, and I've already made it clear, I don't think they're a tournament team anyway. That ship has sailed for me. But at that point, it's going to make it really tough unless they make a run in the Big Ten tournament for them to have a resume worthy of the dance. And you'd have, 6 or 7 games left to play. I get the sense that Indiana would avoid at all costs a midseason or before the end of the season firing. Do you believe I'm accurate on that premise? And regardless of that answer, how much of that has to do with the fact that Mike Woodson is a beloved alum, one of the most beloved players in program history, and they wouldn't do that to one of their own that way?
Yeah, I guess I'd unpack that one piece at a time. Number one, I don't think, even in that scenario where they go 1-3 in their next 4, I think they're closer to the tournament than you think they are. Now, I think they're on the bubble, probably on the wrong side of it, but it is worth remembering, they got a couple quad 1 wins on the road. They're not great wins, but they are quad 1 wins. You've just given them another one at home. They would need to put a run together over the last 6 games of the season without a doubt. But there's not really a bad loss in that stretch other than, I guess, maybe Washington on the road. Even that would be a little bit forgivable. So I don't think they're as far out of the tournament picture, at least in terms of bubble conversation, as you think they are if they go 1-3 in the next 4. I still think that it's sledding uphill, but I would just kind of like they're very much kind of in the first 4 out, next 4 out sort of, grouping right now. And what I remind people annually when I cover a team that falls in that kind of category is nobody's got a very good resume down there. You get that far down the NCAA tournament seed line, you're dealing with a lot of teams with flawed resumes, and Indiana would still have a lot of opportunities for wins. I think it just would be about sledding uphill. To the question about a mid-season coaching change, I really don't know. All I can say is, and these two statements are going to kind of contradict one another. Number one, I do not believe, and I'd have to run back through, but I do not believe I have ever covered a mid-season coaching dismissal that was purely performance related. Obviously, I've seen coaches dismissed for NCAA issues or, things happening off the court or off the field. I've seen coaches dismissed maybe before a bowl game, but for purely performance reasons, this place has not, at least in its recent history, tended to fire coaches in season. Even when you could feel like, and I'm talking about all the way down through the non-revenue sports, the Olympic sports, even when you could feel like it was clearly headed in a certain direction, there was always kind of a wait. I might be missing 1 or 2 that I'm not thinking of, but I've been around IU athletics a long time. It is not something they have done very often, if at all, in my time covering the department. The thing I will say that is, that is kind of counteracts that, or whatever you want to say, is I go back to what I said earlier. Basketball is different. And I'm not saying that's a reason to do it. I'm just saying the one reason I wouldn't be comfortable declaring this will happen, this won't happen based on all this past precedent is there really is no other program in the department quite like men's basketball here. And so I don't think you can look at what Indiana did with, baseball, in 2005, or what Indiana did with, volleyball when they made the switch to Steve Aird or whoever, fill in the blank with whatever sport you want to talk to, and consider it directly analogous to the way Indiana would handle basketball, because it is a different animal here.
He is the beat writer. Go ahead, Zach.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, I was just there was the last bit about Woodson. I mean,
the alum tie, like, does that make him immune to such a disgraceful exit?
I certainly think there's going to be every desire to try and be respectful to his history, his status with the program, his status with the fan base. Obviously, some of that's going to be informed just by the way things are going right now. But in broader terms, in the long-term sort of historical perspective, I'm sure Indiana will do whatever it can if it decides that it wants to go in another direction to sort of be as graceful with the program legend as it can be. But I have no idea what that looks like, because again, that's something I've never really seen around here. That's not something Indiana's kind of ever done. Is hiring and then in this hypothetical future firing someone you would consider a program legend and kind of a beloved alum.
Zach Osterman is the beat writer for Indiana Athletics for the Indianapolis Star on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Hoosiers and Boilers tomorrow night. All of the coverage, of course, with the Indy Star, IndyStar.com, and with Zach on social media as well. Appreciate it, Zach. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, as always.
All right, here's my question for you, Jimmy, about I have an NCAA tournament bracketing question that I'm hoping you can answer. This has kept me awake at night many a time.
I would love to help you get closer to sleep, Jake, even though I know it's not just that one question that keeps you up at night.
I want to get into the Myles Turner trade chatter because we're getting into that point now because it's a week from today, the trade deadline, and now all of a sudden it's like, we know where Myles Turner's going. And I want to get into that. But this hit me last night with a brain dropping about 2:20 a.m. I didn't sleep well because I knew I had to do the blood draw. Do you ever have to give blood?
I've only done it the one time.
It's the rubber thing they put on your arm. That's what I can't deal with.
The tourniquet?
Yeah, just the way the burn that it gives, like the way that it rubs on your skin, and then they tighten it, and
Sure.
And then they always, for me, every attendant I've ever had uses their middle finger like a little man on a trampoline of my vein because they love my vein. They're like, oh, look at the buoyancy, boing, 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 and they're playing it like they're playing a ukulele, except for that and they're like, this is incredible, and then they're calling, Jane, you got to come in here and see this guy's vein.
You know how JMV has sports arousals? Those are nurse arousals.
I was going to say, I think you might have a class action on your hands. So I might talk to somebody.
Loved it, and I guess it's a good thing. I'd rather have that than when they're like, we can't find a vein. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, I didn't sleep because I knew that I had to give blood this morning, and there's nothing that I hate more in the world than giving blood. But you got to do what you got to do. Yes. Then I started thinking about if Indiana is or is not on the bubble.
I have a follow-up to your question to me.
Here's the thing. Only Jimmy, because he gets into the quad ones and knows all that, and I don't think he ever did the NCAA tournament overnight fantasy camp, but
I've not.
I need you to put on your thinking cap, hopefully not Eddie's because I need it to fit snug, to answer for me a question about the bubble of the NCAA tournament that I'm going to virtually guarantee you're going to say, that is a fabulous question. I've never been asked. I've never thought about it, but here's my guess. Okay?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, we'll do it next. Jimmy, when you talk about
By the way, Eddie, you missed a golden opportunity a segment or two to go and not play the SpongeBob theme song coming back from break, but that's okay. When we got to the jellyfish point, I was disappointed we didn't go that route. That's all right.
I'm
Collins
the
is
jelly,
fine.
I had a theme for today's show. Anyway,
I respect
so
it.
it's okay.
I respect it.
I like Swedish fish. Those are kind of like jellyfish, right?
I also like a good Swedish fish every now and again.
So if I eat Swedish fish, that make me a cannibal?
It might affect your backbone.
Well, I don't have one apparently. Jellyfish, right?
Exactly.
Spineless. What's your theme today? Phil Collins?
What's worse, spineless
Is
or
it Phil
brainless?
Collins' birthday?
It is.
Can I guess Phil Collins? What's worse? did you
Spineless
say?
or brainless? Sometimes they're both thrown at the same time.
I'd go with spineless.
All
Well,
right.
I don't know. Brainless be tough.
Yeah.
Phil Collins, I'm going to guess the age of Phil Collins, who, as I mentioned, made his film debut when he and his father happened to be in actual footage of the Beatles on a train platform in A Hard Day's Night. That would have been around, I'm going to guess that was like 68. He was like 11 at the time. I'm going to say that Phil Collins is, boy, would he be 70? I'll say 74.
I'm going to say 70.
74.
Well done.
I guess we know that spineless is the option over brainless now, isn't
Well,
it?
indeed.
Okay, so if you are on the bubble, Indiana, when it comes to the tournament, is on the bubble. Selection Sunday rolls around, and they're like, well, I'll tell you, here are the teams that are on the bubble. I've never really understood this. What's the origin of that term? What does it mean?
Man, I pulled up like 8 different resumes thinking that the way this conversation was going to go
What does it
was
mean?
comparing them team by team, and now
Do
you're
we know
asking
what
me
it means?
bubble
If you're,
origins.
so if you're just for example,
I don't know where it comes from, but my thought would be that like at some point, like the .com bubble burst, like you have these hopes and dreams that at some point pop. Your hopes of making the tournament are gone, and if you miss it, your bubble's been popped. You're living on the edge. You're the last teams to get a ticket in.
but that means you are a bubble, not you're on one. I guess just because if the bubble pops, you're out because you're riding on it.
Maybe you're standing on it. It's a free fall.
So right now, Kansas is what? They're ranked like 12th or something. I'm going to guess Kansas's record is 18-5. Am I right with their record?
They're a projected 3 seed right now.
Okay, so they are not on the bubble.
Correct.
So
They're
where
nowhere
are they?
near it.
Are they under the bubble? Are they on the side of the bubble? Where are they?
They are clear
They're
of the
just-
bubble.
It's just another way of saying on the cusp.
So,
They're not on the chopping block. They're clear. They got their feet up. They're in the
but
clubhouse.
what I'm saying is, if theoretically, if this is a bubble,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
this little thing I have,
Yep.
and Indiana's right here on the bubble,
Yeah.
okay, the bubble, it's a bubble of what?
Hope and optimism and dreams.
Okay, so they are the bubble. They're not on the bubble. They are the bubble. If the bubble bursts, it's spitting them out somewhere, right? Otherwise, so they are a bubble. Is that what you say? They're a bubble team?
Yeah, they're
Yes.
being
You don't
spit
say
out
so.
to
They're
the
not. So
NIT.
theoretically, nobody's on the bubble. They just are a bubble. They're not riding on a bubble. They are a bubble.
I mean,
They are a bubble that they're hoping blends into
Why do
the
you have to
stream and
ruin
doesn't
things?
pop. Right?
I'm an equal bubble guy. You know, whatever you want to do with your bubble, you go ahead, man. Just keep it legal.
Don't
I wanna
ruin
know,
these things
What's
for me,
the
please.
origin of the term? And is the term you are on the bubble or you are the bubble?
The phrase on the bubble originates from sport, specifically referring to a team or athlete who is right on the cusp of making or not making the cut, like a tournament or roster, where
Okay.
they are considered on the bubble because their position is precarious, like a bubble that could burst at any moment.
Didn't I just say that?
So they are a bubble. They're not on a bubble.
The term, you can fight AI on this, Jake, if you'd like. The term is believed to have originated in motor racing when a driver holding the last qualifying position is on the bubble, as they could easily be bumped out if another driver posts a faster time.
Yeah. So they are a bubble.
I'm just reading you what it says.
Okay.
I think we're in the semantics. How much of your late night fights with yourself are semantically based? Would you say?
How much of these do you air out to Boo?
Oh, plenty. Boo actually is a very good
Does
confidant.
Boo need therapy?
Probably. Boo is a lovely companion. He is a fabulous pet.
Boo's got the BetterHelp app on Jake's phone. When he leaves
Last
it out at
night,
night.
Boo and I had a long conversation where I said, Boo,
Is it about his parties?
how did you know that?
I know you keep telling him every day when you leave that you'll be back and
I
tell him
do.
not to throw a party.
I do. How did you know that?
I've called you once or twice and you've been on the phone as you're
Are you
leaving your.
bugging my place?
No.
I
would
said,
never want to do
here's
that.
exactly the conversation I had with Boo last night. I said, Boo, I'm going to ask Jimmy about the bubble tomorrow, so you're off the hook.
You talked exactly like that.
No, I have
Psychopath.
I said it like this. Booskers. That's it. But I said, Boo, I said to him, I said, this is year 3 now that I've had you. I adopted you, I believe, coming up 3rd year anniversary, maybe 2nd year anniversary in March. And I said, the trade deadline's a week from tomorrow, Boo. And Myles Turner he's the bubble, right? In terms of his staying with the Pacers. There are now odds of where Myles Turner is going to land. And the team that has the best odds of getting Myles Turner, the Los Angeles Lakers.
What?
Now, and so I said this to Boo, and I said, I just watched the game tonight. I was there when you were having your party, and the Pacers looked really good, and Siakam had 37, and Halliburton had a really good game, and Turner was really active. He was shooting the ball well. He was extremely active defensively. He was exactly what Myles Turner needs to be and what he more often than not is for Indiana. And, Boo, I have sat here and thought about this on what benefit there is, even though his contract is going to expire, in what the Pacers could get back. And Boo, of course, doesn't talk. He's a cat. But that's exactly what he said. And I ran that, believe it or not, through the the Elixir. Now, I paid for an upgrade with the Elixir, okay?
The feline upgrade?
I paid for the feline upgrade on the Elixir. That is a recording. Eddie, I brought in that recording, correct? That's a recording I made last night of Boo's reaction, right?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking to myself, what are the odds? Because, Jimmy, would you agree that, you knew that I was going to say the Lakers, right?
Yes, because it's been the same Laker rumor at the deadline the last 5 years with Myles Turner. Yes.
I mean,
and you're not wrong. That piece is everywhere. There's 3 or 4 different think pieces about this trade could finally get Myles Turner to the City of Angels. Yeah, it's not happening. Though you could do worse than Rui Hachimura's when I read, but no, it's not happening. They're not going to do it.
So I ran it through the feline Elixir.
Do we have a different sound that?
I think you just need the sound
same
with
Elixir,
some meows
same
underneath
Elixir.
it.
Okay.
So first we play the sound clip. This is, of course, the sound clip from Boo's reaction of me asking about Myles Turner. Okay.
Oh boy, I gotta pull it back up, Jake. I'm sorry. I thought we were done with that.
You don't have the okay. Okay. This is the feline Elixir, and then this is what here's what it interprets from the cat language.
Again, we do this every year. When is dinner?
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Short, sweet, and to the point.
Do I get wet food or dry food tonight?
Honestly, I don't think he's going anywhere. I
Pate
don't
or
know this.
bisque?
I don't know this. Honestly, I would tell you, if I thought that I had some sort of insider knowledge, I would say, don't be surprised if. I don't have that. But I don't think he's going anywhere. I think there's a lot of talk and conversation elsewhere about Myles Turner being traded. But I don't hear the Pacers talking about Myles Turner being traded. And if you were to look at a trade that they could make, who on the Lakers roster is somebody that would make the Pacers better? And when I say make them better, look, 100% I can tell you this. This is true of every team, but 100% I can tell you the Pacers, like any other organization, but it is very, very clear within the Pacers, mission statement, if you will, that when it comes to trades and the trade deadline, you are open to anything so long as it makes your team better. And if you take what players are on the Laker roster that make the Pacers roster less Myles Turner a better team, who is there that you would say, you know what, we should do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a piece that the
Not
Lakers
one.
would be willing to move.
LeBron James, Anthony Davis, sure,
right,
okay,
but they're
great.
not right. They're not getting moved.
Outside of that,
I mean, they're not going to move on for him because he's a rookie piece. But if you had another contract to match it, Dalton Connect's a fun young piece. Maybe the one that I saw, and it does not make the Pacers better, to be clear, but it does answer a question of a void that Eddie proposed the other day. And I want to clarify this on the front end. I don't think they do this. I wouldn't do it. I would stand pat with Turner. You could do worse than Rui Hachimura for your front court if that's the move you're making. There was a one I saw that was the Pacers sending Turner away to L.A., and they get back a 2029 first-round protected pick, top 5, and Hachimura. Like, you're at least getting a piece back, but would it make them better? No, and that's really the problem. That's a move that you're making if the Pacers were like the 9 seed in the East right now. There was no hope. They had a ton of injuries, and Myles tells them you're walking. You're not making that move right now when you're middle of the Eastern Conference, and it's not even a lateral move. It's a backwards move. I think it's much more likely if they're going to try to deal Myles because he is too expensive or they need to move on, I think it's much more likely to sign and trade at the end of the year or in the offseason than it is between now and next week.
Jeremiah, exactly with my point. And thank you to Jeremiah, not only for his frequent listenership of the program, but also as a firefighter, a guy that is clearly selflessly out there on a day-to-day basis, willing to put it out there to help others, which is great. But he says, guys, there isn't a single Laker player that is an equivalent to Turner. I agree with that. There are a couple of players out there whose names are going to be mentioned at the trade deadline that I do think Indiana would be hesitant about. That, and I don't mean big time players, but they do, their homework, their research, etc., on just the overall character of guys, how they're going to fit in, what kind of teammates they are. And there are some players that I think they would be lukewarm on. One of them, Christian Wood, for example. I mean, I don't know much about him, but in conversations I've heard people say, like, they don't think Christian Wood is fully dedicated in terms of, like, just the overall atmosphere that you would want out of a professional player. Talented guy, no question. But I look at it and I go, the only way they're going to make a trade is if it makes them better. And I think they really like Myles Turner. That they're gambling a little bit. They're gambling a little bit because they're gambling that they are going to be able to retain him and that somebody else isn't going to come in and swoop in and give him a huge number. But I just don't think that other teams are going to give him that much bigger a number than Indiana is willing to give, because I think his game fits better with Indiana than it does elsewhere.
Makes them better, or I would throw one caveat on there, gives them enough resources to let Chad Buchanan and Kevin Pritchard do their thing, and that is not a trade with the Lakers. That's not where that comes from. That comes from a 3-team deal, or that comes from I'm just going to throw them out there because they have a ton of capital always, the Thunder. I'm not saying the Thunder would do that move, but you get my point. It's a move that sets the Pacers up to make the next move this offseason. But no, there's not a trade that I've seen that they would make with Myles Turner between now and the deadline that would be done to make them better this year. The only way there would be a move made is if you're saying, we're worried about the offseason, we're worried about trade partners in a sign and trade, let's move him now, and holy cow, look at the assets we're getting back.
The thing is, the position that Indiana would be looking for, there's something Indiana would be looking for in a trade with Myles Turner. Okay? There is something they'd be looking for that I think you absolutely do it. But there's a caveat. If you're going to trade Myles Turner, then you are going to do so. There is one player that the Pacers need. There is a missing link for the Indiana Pacers that is the position they need more than any other. He's about 6'8.5". He weighs 210 pounds. He's got a very quick release in coming off a curl on the baseline, or he can quickly put the ball between his legs if you guard him too close on the three, and with a really good mid-range game or a threat to score from the baseline. And he's nameless because I'm strictly speaking hypothetically of the proverbial 3-and-D guy, a guy that can hit you threes and guard on the wing, and especially if you are trading Myles Turner. This is the biggest thing that does not get discussed. The Pacers' defense right now is improved, but you've got a guy in Tyrese Halliburton that is probably more often than not going to allow a guy past him into the lane. Nembhard's a pretty good on-ball defender, but his lateral quickness probably, it is possible to get past him, although I do like he's kind of a bulldog type, a Ronald Norrid type, if you will. But then, in terms of their wing defense, I think Nesmith and Shepard are good defenders. More often than not, one is in or the other is in, not necessarily both, but they are not at the length, buzzword, that you like. The Pacers' best defense, quite frankly, in terms of consistently defending high-percentage shots, is the rim protection of Myles Turner. You can allow guys to, ole, just go right past into the lane if Myles Turner is there because he has the ability to alter shots. And they have relied very heavily on Turner being the guy that has to clean up the loose mess that takes place with players getting into the lane and coming in off the wings. If you trade Myles Turner, it absolutely, emphatically has to be for either A, another rim protector, or B, more perfectly, a wing defender that is a lockdown wing defender that can slide across as well, a Derek McKee type that can play at various levels at way longer than his size and score for you to make up for the fact that your last level of defense is not there. If you lose your free safety, then you got to have really good corners. And if you lose your rim protector, you got to have really good defensive wings. They have a couple of them, but they don't have a really long one. The problem is that guy that we're talking about, that mystery player, is absolutely 150% the most coveted player in the NBA. And so, therefore, teams that have him ain't giving him up. And that's why I believe Myles Turner is not traded, for the combination of those two factors. That's why I think he stays here and is a Pacer a week from tomorrow. We may get off the air today and at 3:15 get an announcement that he's been traded. I don't know, but it would surprise me.
The other thing is, if they, and Eddie brought this point up yesterday, if they deal him for assets, and you could debate the value of assets they would get for him because he's on an expiring deal and teams can't legally sign him to a new contract till season's end. So you could debate the packages there. But if you're just getting packages of draft picks, which I think that Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan have proven time and time again, they have the ability to get creative and pull rabbits out of their hats to develop the roster and to change things on the fly. So I like the idea of them having capital in their war chest to go make moves like that. But another reason that it's not going to happen is because, and this is the point Eddie brought up earlier this week, there's no acquisition they make, at least it's been reported out there or that we can foresee, that does anything other than send the message to the roster in the locker room that we're not good enough to contend for a title this season. And I don't think they are as it stands. I still think they're either a piece or like a Walker or Mathurin leap away from reaching that threshold of being with Cleveland and being with Boston in terms of the very top of the East. But you remove any doubt of that conversation, Jake, if you trade Myles Turner tomorrow for 2 first-rounders and a second-round pick in the next 5 years. Like that's not the message that you're sending to this team. Additionally, and you've brought this up a couple of times, the way they play stylistically, I don't know that this offense does anything other than regress. Both sides of the ball, really, but especially their flow offensively, does anything other than regress if you trade Myles Turner for, role-playing big and draft capital. I just don't see it.
Why do we say both sides of the ball when it's a ball? It's round.
You've been hanging out with him too much.
No, it can still have 2 sides.
Can it?
Yes.
Good counter.
Let me ask you this. My friends in Australia, when you say Australia and you say it's amazing that we're talking to Australia because it's on what?
The other side of the world.
Correct.
What Eddie's trying to tell you is the basketball's flat.
No.
The world is round.
Yes.
But when you are visualizing it, you have a top.
But again,
and a
why
bottom.
do we say it's on the other side?
I think because it's a different side of the box score is always
Does
how I thought
side
it.
always refer to something that comes with angles?
It's a good question.
Can you look up the definition of side? It's a great question by you. Clearly, a lot of the watermelon gummies.
Yeah, I was
but
going to say, you didn't dabble in with him today, did you? Like,
No.
we're approaching very
A
zen
position to
points
the
here.
left or right of an object, place, or central point.
Okay, and the central point of the earth or a basketball, if you have a basketball sitting before you, you have a left side and a right side because it has an equator that goes around the basketball.
Either of the two halves of an object, surface, or place regarded as divided by an imaginary central line.
Man, educate and
An
entertain.
imaginary central line. Would that be, let's say, the equator or the prime meridian? Did you know?
Meridian.
Huh? Do you know the east-west divider of Indianapolis?
No.
Jimmy, do you know the east-west divider of Indianapolis?
We've had this conversation before, but it's
Do you know the
escaped me.
north-south divider of Indianapolis?
Give it to me. The circle.
If I told you that I lived at 1800 East, I'm at 1800 East Washington Street. Then I live where in relation to where we are right now? 1800 East Washington Street.
I would be guessing. I'm going to stay
Eddie?
silent.
1800 East Washington Street. How far away from here? We are on Monument Circle, 1800 East Washington Street.
I'm going to guess you're 1,800, 1.8 miles?
Look at the big brain on Eddie. Correct. 18 blocks or 1.8 miles because the east-west divider is Meridian Street. So 1 block to our left, if you're looking north, is 100 block west, 200 block west, 300 block west, etc. 10 blocks make a mile, approximately. Same thing to the north and south of Washington Street. Washington Street is the north-south divider. So therefore, 1 block behind us, the corner of Meridian and Washington, in terms of an address standpoint, is the exact middle point of Indianapolis.
Speaking of blocks, will Turner's block still be here next week? I mean,
that
that's
is an
ultimately
excellent
the question.
That's the best question of all, right?
Yeah.
And I go back to I do think he's going to be here.
Yeah.
Partially because I think, and again, you're taking a risk because you're risking that you're going to be able to re-sign him. If he goes anywhere, it would be on a sign and trade, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, there is a serious conversation that we will pocket for another day for do you re-sign him next year? And I've made it pretty clear unless the money is really nice for the Pacers, I wouldn't, but that's a conversation for another day. I think he's still here by next week.
If you're standing on the fictional steps of Monument Circle facing north and you look to your right, what direction are you facing? If you're standing looking north, but you
East?
What's that?
It'd be east, right?
And guess who's next?
Well done.
Tony East joins us next. preparing to come back onto this fine radio program, which we call Query and Company. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison is the CEO of the company. Jimmy Cook is the president. You folks all a part of the company. We appreciate you for doing exactly that. As Eddie was dialing up our next guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, I heard him begin the conversation by saying, "So how's the renovation going?" Meaning that there is a room within the house of Tony East that is being redone. If it were, for example, Jimmy, give me a room in the house. Just give me any room. The laundry room. If it were the laundry room, then you would say that the renovation would be the area where obviously the washer and dryer go, because that's the centerpiece of the room, right?
Yeah.
Question is, are the Pacers in the middle of a renovation, and are they looking to move their centerpiece in Myles Turner? Tony joins us on the program now. Tony, I'll begin with that. This is the annual conversation, Myles Turner. They're going to trade him or not. If he is still here a week from tomorrow, is that because Indiana is confident they're going to re-sign him, or because other teams backed away from acquiring him because they are confident they won't?
Well, I think the main reason that he might be on the team a week from now is that he's good.
Correct.
He's a good player, and they're a good team, right? If they, when they were 10-15, this conversation was totally different, right? If you're not good or your record isn't good, and you might be playing bound or not even making the postseason bound, you absolutely think about what you do with your expiring contracts. And to be clear, the Pacers still should have a meeting about Myles Turner, but they're good. They're in fifth. There's a chance by the end of this week, if they keep playing well, or the Bucks lose again, that they're in fourth and are in position for a first round series where they're the hosts. That kind of team keeps their best players, and Myles Turner is one of their best players. That's the highest level notes of the conversation. As to the actual question about what it would signal about their future, I think they should be confident that they would keep him anyway. I think the market dynamics are in their favor, unless the Detroit Pistons decide they want another center in the summer, just in that all the teams with cap space either already have a center or maybe don't necessarily want to use it on a player who is a good starter but not going to change their fortunes. Not that that's a terrible use of assets, just it's not a great market for any free agent, not even just Myles Turner. So that kind of works in the Pacers' favor, but also the Pacers can't pay any other player as much as they can pay Myles Turner in the summer, so that kind of works in his favor. Regardless of all that, it's not like they got to this point, they're just oh, crap, Myles, we forgot. They certainly know what he would want and know what it would take to keep their team intact and how they need to build it. So I think that they're fairly confident they can keep him. They've talked about what he means to them and what it would mean to have him around. And if they were truly scared of his aging or his price, they would have shopped him a while ago, and they never have, because he's good and he helps them win. So my suspicion is that he will still be on the team next week, unless there's a trade they can do where they get back a center who is as good or better than Myles Turner. In the absence of that, I don't see why they would even humor it right now.
Is there any world where a lesser center, but a piece that is a startable center for your front court, accompanied with assets that would allow Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan to work magic, would entice them? Or are they past the point of doing anything from a personnel standpoint that makes the roster for 2024-25 worse?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess if it was really strong assets, you have to think about it, right? Last year they were good, and they traded away Buddy Hield and got worse at his position, bringing back Doug McDermott, right? I've cited that a lot, but that's why I mentioned what I just said about the other center and why you said that in your question. They got another shooter back. So that's the only reasonable Turner trade to me, is what you just described, where they get a different, at least starting caliber center. But, Turner's been good in the postseason. That's not easy at the center position. It takes very unique skills to fit your team in a way that makes you good in the playoffs. And he fits well with Halliburton and Siakam. So they'd have to consider fit a lot as well. But the assets would have to be pretty strong for that to be something they consider, because, like you said, if they can get home court being worse this year, what does that signal to the rest of your team, to your fan base, about what you're trying to do? It doesn't really make sense to me, given how well they've been playing and where they're at right now, even though, again, it's something they have to think about. It's the life of Myles Turner, unfortunately.
Tony, when you look at the Myles Turner situation, Tony East joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Do you think that, so if the Pacers, for example, and I'm in agreement with you. I don't have inside knowledge on this, but I have enough tea leaves to be prepared to say I absolutely think that he will be a Pacer here for the rest of the season. But do they do that do you think they have a talk with him, I guess I'd say, to get a ballpark on how confident they are that they will be able to re-sign him? If if they are kind of at a stalemate in terms of the number they think that he's going to want, where do things stand on the cap if he wants, say, $30 million next year? And would they go ahead and stick with them even if they don't have assurance that they're going to be able to re-sign him?
I mean, I don't want to assume anything has happened that would be maybe considered tampering or illegal in the Pacers front office, of course. However, I would strongly assume that they already know what he would like his next contract to be, or at least the ballpark of it. And, you know, in the Pacers and in some ways Myles Turner's favor, like the center market has been very clearly set for the non-superstar level centers the last couple of years, and that every guy in that category has gotten almost the exact same number, somewhere between 25 and 30 million. Nick Claxton, Isaiah Hartenstein, Brook Lopez, Jared Allen, Porzingis. I think I'm missing one. Like, all fit right in that salary range, right? Şengün got a little over that, but you know, he's got a chance to be better than all those guys, right? So that's kind of what I think the negotiating range would be like. And if it costs 25 to 30 million, let's say, to keep Myles Turner next year, they could do it. I mean, they have his bird rights, and they could do anything and be good with it if they're willing to pay the tax. That's where the financial part comes in, is if they're not. And, you know, you've seen it this year. This number will go down because some tax teams will either cut money or get out of the tax entirely. But as of right now, the Pacers and every team that doesn't pay the tax is projected to get like $17 million in luxury tax payments from the tax-paying teams this year. Like, that's Turner's basically his full salary this year. That's just a coincidence. It's not that the tax payment has to go towards one player. Like, with the way the Suns and Celtics and some other teams are spending, the Wolves, you know, it's really easy if you're close to the line or have ways to get under it. So in that vein for the Pacers, even if the penalties of paying the tax next year are a little less punitive, you'd have to imagine that if Turner wants that much money, they would try to keep him and shed money elsewhere, whether that's, you know, moving a bench player for a lesser salary or getting off of one entirely if possible from a salary perspective. And perhaps they look to do that at this trade deadline so that those finances are opened up when the time comes and not them needing to do it in the summer or at some point next season. But that is what I feel like is the most likely, like you said, tea leaves reading reality, is that they have to sort out their financial situation after this season when, you know, they really know what this core is capable of. They really know how Myles Turner fits in, both from a salary and play perspective, and they can go from there.
He is the host of the Locked On Pacers podcast. Tony East, our guest, as well as the Bobby Marks of the Midwest, some call him around this time of year, on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Speaking of which, I reference Marks because of his ability.
Bobby Marks. I'm sorry, Bobby Marks.
You could take that up with him and blame me for it later. But I bring that up because of your intricacies and knowledge of the way the salary cap operates and you know, all the different tax aprons that teams have to balance with throughout the course of the season. Let's look at the Pacers away from Myles Turner for a second. I don't mean away from him as in they've dealt him. I mean, okay, they're keeping him. But the Pacers, Chad Buchanan and Kevin Pritchard decide we want to make a tiny move, maybe to add another role player, or maybe try to, you know, pull a magic act and bring another front court piece for a bag of chips like they did Thomas Bryant. What would it take for them to make a minor move based on how constrained they are against the cap?
Yeah, they're in a tough spot for that kind of move. Not that they can't think about upgrades, they should. They're in, you know, fifth, maybe fourth by the time the deadline's here. But because they're so close to the tax, and again, maybe they're willing to pay it, I would strongly suggest that they are not. And if I were the Pacers, I would not be wanting to, because then I can start the repeater tax clock later if I want to pay the tax later, regardless of my own opinions of that. I would have a strong suspicion that any trade they would make for an upgrade or a player that they would have immediately be in their rotation would have to be a trade that they also like take in less salary than they send out, which makes it harder for that to happen. And you know, the other thing, like, you can answer this maybe if you want, but like what position would you imagine that would be at, right? Because minor upgrades for their bench, their depth is their superpower. They have a really strong bench, and if they're upgrading a starter, they have to send out meaningful assets to do that, and that is an entirely different trade than I feel like you're talking about. But to do that, they'd have to send out, you know, a Mathurin, a Walker, or their limited currently available first-rounders, because they have that one pick hanging out that makes it harder for them to trade other firsts. I don't want to get too into rules, but you know, the way that they would upgrade is kind of hard, because they'd have to bench someone else to fit that upgrade in unless that player was the one sent out in the trade. So that minor upgrades for them are just really challenging with their financial constraints and roster situation. And they set up the situation on purpose, right? They like the team they have. Clearly it's pretty good. They were good last year. They made the conference finals. It's just hard to maneuver in season when that's your reality. And you have, you know, two completely dead roster spots of players on torn Achilles who are making a combined almost $6-7 million. So their flexibility isn't that high. That's why, a consolidation trade at some point, maybe even right now, if they got the right player, even though it'd be kind of hard to do, makes some sense. It's just really tricky for them to do much of anything of substance unless they're willing to send out a ton of second rounders for somebody that would then bench someone else that is on their team and already pretty good. So it's just they're between a rock and a hard place, and that's fine. They're both a good rock and a good hard place. It's not as fun for trades when they can't do as much wiggling and fun stuff like they've done in past seasons.
Rock and hard place is not great, Jake, by the way, for those spine injuries. I don't know if you've heard about that.
The
or
thoracic
not, yeah, exactly.
sprain.
Yep,
yeah, it's tough, right? Well, getting out of it in particular is tough, right? Tony East is our guest, by the way. At Tony R. East on the X-Post Twitter is where you can see his work. Next Hoops, Forbes Sports, WTHR, Locked On Pacers, all of the different places, along with the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, where you see him. Okay, Tony, last night in that game, no Andrew Nembhard, no Benedict Mathurin. What's that?
Yeehaw, what a fun game that ended up being, huh?
So that's what I was going to say to you. If you look at that game, Pascal Siakam's got a career high, right? Turner was great. Halliburton with 30. Shepard hitting 4 threes. And then McConnell being, I thought that was as good a game as you're going to get out of TJ McConnell, particularly defensively. Was that, from those casts, was that the best that we could see out of Indiana? To me, felt like all cylinders. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And the way they beat Detroit a couple weeks ago in Detroit was, Myles Turner hit 8 threes, but Andrew Nembhard just was awesome against Cade Cunningham, right? Like, Cade was 7 for 21, I think, and had 7 turnovers or something. And with Jaden Ivey hurt, they don't have anyone else who can really dribble towards the basket every possession, so they're very limited on offense. And so when I heard Nembhard was out before the game, when Rick told us, I thought, oh man, this is going to be tough for them. How are they going to defend him? What's this going to take? And Ben Shepard was on him. I thought it would be Neesmith, right? And they didn't even do that. And Shepard did a great job. They trapped him a lot coming around screens. They had full court pressure. I don't know if you were there, but they were all amped about that 8-second violation they forced in the first 4 minutes of the game. So I wouldn't even say they defended Cade that well for the whole game. What do you have, 32 and 8 or something? He still played really well, but they set a tone early defensively, and that really mattered. They were up 18-4 in 5 minutes, and they won by 14. Right, that early stretch was really important. So that was about as reasonable as they could expect to play defensively, even just for a few minutes. And their offense was sensational. Shepard fits with any lineup because he can shoot, and he shot well last night. And Aaron Neesmith can fit any lineup because he can guard and he can shoot, and they fit well around the stars. And the stars were awesome, right? That's the best you can expect or close to it from a combined game for Siakam and Halliburton. They combined for over half of the team's points. That was the best Siakam scoring game the Pacers have ever seen, right? He's never hit 37 for them before. So, that was pretty close to the apex of what the Nembhard-less Pacers can be, perhaps a little bit better on defense. Nembhard and Mathurin-less Pacers can be. Perhaps a little better could come defensively, but Obi Toppin could have contributed a little more. I thought he had one of his worst games of the season last night. But outside of that, they played pretty well. They responded to a very verbal, let's say, Pistons team, and that was a pretty big win. I was curious if jet lag would get to them in any way. Instead, they looked like the more energetic team. It was pretty impressive.
Speaking of the verbal, chippy Pistons, last night I went to the game with my buddy Mike Stevens, physical therapist of the Stars. He's worked on my feet many a time. And he pointed this out, and I thought it was a really good
hazard
point.
Pay for that?
What's that?
Does he get a hazard pay for that?
That's right. Well, when the dogs are barking, he's got the remedies. So he pointed this out. I thought it was a really good point. Considering the verbal nature of the Pistons, the chippy nature of the Pistons, their head coach is J.B. Bickerstaff Jr. Is Bickerstaff the most appropriate last name, considering the chippiness of the players?
Yes, and he was certainly bickering last night, right?
He was,
he was
man.
Talking the whole game. He got hey, yeah, to fit right into your pun. Yeah, he was very chatty, which was really, not really strange, I guess. I'm sure, the team takes on the identity of their coach to some extent in a game like that. But yeah, he got a tech, and he was yapping after a lot of calls, and they were all I didn't think any actual foul calls in the game were wrong, or weird last night. That was very strange to me. The player part I get, obviously, but he surprised me certainly in the way that all went down.
I'll be honest. It felt to me, Tony, like a game that was a bigger rivalry for Detroit than it is for Indiana. Did I misread that?
No, I agree with that. And it's weird the way that this has all come down to me because everybody, kind of on both teams, has kind of described this as something that started in that NBA Cup game they had in Indy when the Pistons just smacked the Pacers, and the Pistons were talking during that game. They were talking smack, and they should have. They won, right? Like, that's what you do, and that's what Siakam was talking about after the game. Like, that's the kind of stuff that it should be with these kind of chippier, elevated games, is like the team who wins gets to kind of take on that attitude, and when you win, you get to feel that way and carry that swagger, but then when you lose, you got to hold it the other way, and both teams have kind of felt opposite sides of it, and I think that some guy suggested a line got crossed last night verbally. I don't know what that entailed or who it was. I think we can all potentially guess on what that maybe was, but it was certainly strange to see it get to that point, because a lot of times, I feel like in the NBA, these big feuding things, they happen in one game, everybody gets psyched for the next game, and then just nothing happens, right? We saw that with the Bucks last year after the game ball game. We've seen that millions of times, right, for NBA teams, and this time it actually kept escalating and got to more. So I'd have been curious if there was another Pacers-Pistons game this season, which I suppose is possible if Detroit makes the playoffs, what that would actually entail and look like, because there's certainly some not good feelings going on between these teams.
Tony East with us, covers the Pacers for Locked On Pacers, joins us on the Express Pro Tire Auto guest line. Are you a big yeehaw guy? You dropped a yeehaw in there today, and I always vernacular always makes me chuckle. I was curious if you use that on a day-to-day or just saved especially for us.
I save things for you specifically, Jimmy.
That warms my heart.
The next time I see you, I'll ask you how you are by saying ha yee, and then you'll get a laugh out of that.
Two more yeehaws and you become Tony South.
Yeehaw. I do have some Southern in my family, like people who say ma like it's mile and stuff like that, so I've had to work that out.
How about y'all? Do you ever drop a y'all?
Yeah, I've thrown in a few in my life, yes. I've mostly cut it out.
It's a hard habit to quit.
That's right.
Hey!
That was the other one that got me earlier. So from a standpoint, though, Tony, you mentioned it. We were worried about the jet lag or if there'd be anything present from them, and it wasn't last night. And in terms of the makeup of the Central Division right now, as I kind of deviate from that point, and more so what you were talking about with the chippiness and Siakam highlighting the fact that, yeah, if you're up or you're winning, you should talk some smack. What is it about the Central Division in particular? And I get it, it's a division rival, even though divisions don't really matter anymore in the NBA. But like the last 14 months, the Pistons and the Bucks having legitimate issues with the Pacers. Strangely enough, they've been on the losing end of most of those meetings.
It might just be the Pacers to some extent, and that's fine. Like, if everybody's taking issue with it, there might be something to it, and all these fan bases don't appear to like the Pacers or the way they operate in these games. But, I think when you're winning, you've earned the right to do that, and that might just be what it is. We'll see if anything comes to it with the Bulls or the Cavs, who are perhaps a little tamer in terms of team personality, but are headed different directions. But that would kind of make it clear who the through line is if it's Pacers and one of those teams. If there was another Central Division B, perhaps it would be a little easier to zoom out and say that, it's just a bunch of intense teams. But it feels like right now the common denominator is the team we talk about on this program all the time, who just rub people the wrong way or say things that bother their opponents. But they've been good the whole time, so it's not like they're saying nothing clearly. But if they were playing bad, it would certainly hit a little different locally, I believe.
Tony, I'll end with something that I believe you and I were in agreement on this, and I can't remember if it was yesterday or 2 days ago when the news came out about Kelsey Mitchell. She was at the game last night with Stephanie White of the Fever. My understanding is, and you tell me if you've gotten any word different than this in terms of Kelsey Mitchell, while it was issued the statement that she had signed a contract with the Fever, my understanding is that was basically the formality aspect of the Fever, and I'm going to use it in generic terms, the fact that they had basically, quote-unquote, franchise tagged her or the equivalent thereof, and it is a one-year agreement that allows them to continue for another year their partnership while still working on signing her to then a longer-term deal a year from now. Does that correspond with or match with your understanding of the situation as well?
That does correspond with my understanding. In fact, I can do you one better, Jake. The fact that this was signed before February 1st, which is teams can officially negotiate, means that has to be what happened, right? Because the only contract Kelsey Mitchell could legally have signed with the Fever before February 1st is that offer, that core offer that they sent her. So the fact that this release is already out in public and known means that is what she signed. And I thought that was where this was going to go, because I've had it explained to me from like anyone who works in or around the W that every contract signed by a good player. In fact, it's potentially like every player, even not good players this offseason, will be a one-year deal because there's a new CBA coming in the W next year, and there's a chance it significantly changes structures of contracts, what max salaries could be, what teams are able to do, even the rookie scale. Like there's an expectation that a lot of college players could opt to stay in school for another year just because of that. Why would they want to agree to a cheaper 4-year W contract now when they could wait a year and get a much bigger one potentially? So I think basically every major or important deal signed in the W this offseason is going to be a one-year deal. Kelsey Mitchell's, as soon as she got offered a 1 year at her absolute max with the Fever, I thought, yep, that's going to be what she lands on. Sure enough, she did. So yes, you are correct in that your assumption, and the fact that this release came out before February 1st means that has to be the case.
Okay, Tony, a week from today is the trade deadline. We've talked about Myles Turner. On the way out, any chance Pacers do like one of those minor deals, right? The 11th hour, like, oh, guess what? They just acquired a second-round pick in 2031 for, a guy that, that kind of thing. Any of that stuff at all, or you think it's going to be silent all the way across the board?
I think stand pat's their most likely thing to do, but if they did make a trade, I think the most likely thing you'll see come across your desk is 2:55 p.m. Eastern. It would be a James Wiseman plus cash trade where they acquire basically nothing in return and free up some space away from the luxury tax to sign some guys to 10-day contracts or convert someone else's deal on the team later in the season.
Gotcha. We'll keep our eyes on it. Tony, appreciate it as always.
Yep, you got it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Tony East joining us on the program. Do we have another one of those Yeehaws? That sounded like Hee Haw. Do you remember the show Hee Haw? Either one of you guys watched? I'll bet J&B liked Hee Haw.
Familiar with it.
I thought it was terrible.
Yeehaw.
Hee Haw depressed me when I was a kid. Back in the day, Cracker Barrel was only like in the South, and when you'd walk into Cracker Barrel and that awesome, like old-fashioned drugstore type feel thing it had in the front, you felt like you were watching the show, like Hee Haw was coming to life.
Hey.
Purdue fans might be saying exactly that, or will Indiana? Some 30 or so hours from now, I guess more like 34 hours from now, after Purdue and Indiana do battle in Mackey. Purdue side of it, we talked plenty about Indiana, but Brian Newbert, our friend from Golden Black, going to join us on the other side, find out where the Boilers stand in terms of the rivalry game. That conversation next here on this Thursday edition, Query Company. One more hee-haw on the way out, Eddie, on the Fan. we have to be careful, I guess, right, when it comes to, and this is the really hard thing, admittedly, especially when you are live on the radio and the arrows are flying past, so you don't have time to really properly vet things. And every once in a while, I think it's happened to each of us probably once. It definitely happened to me. I can't remember what the story was, where I can't remember if it was with you guys or the morning show. I think it was with you guys. Do you recall this, where I saw a post and was like, oh gosh, and read it, and then it was like, hey man, that's a fake account. And we got completely duped by it. I don't remember do you remember that scenario, Eddie?
I know it was on this show, but I can't remember what the scenario was.
There are now, this has now been picked up credibly. The latest would be from CBS News. Ravens kicker Justin Tucker, can we agree probably the best kicker in the league, or at least certainly over the last handful of years?
Correct. Yeah, prior to this season and a half. Yes, that's his title.
He has been accused by 6 massage therapists of engaging in inappropriate behavior at 4 high-end spas and wellness centers in the Baltimore area. According to an investigation, now again, the Baltimore Banner was the initial investigator of this. I would certainly hope that, because now it's kind of everywhere, right, including major national outlets are picking up. The Banner itself, I believe, was always thought to be kind of like a gossip site. I'm not trying to discredit them by any stretch, but I don't know that it's considered the quote-unquote mainstream news, if you will. But this is now becoming more circulated around. This sounds very familiar, of course, with the initial reports regarding Deshaun Watson and the allegations made against him in Houston, which led to his, of course, ending up in Cleveland.
He was reportedly banned from 2 spas.
Yeah, it's pretty damning. Anonymous reports, from the alleged victims here that they don't know each other, but all the stories from that piece in the Baltimore Banner have eerily similar details to it. So obviously a lot to still unpack and come forward with that, but a pretty dark look for, you mentioned one of the best kickers in the league, but also like a face of that position as well because of that success.
There are not many places, and especially considering a franchise that has been as good and as consistent as the Baltimore Ravens, it's not many places where the kicker is one of the first 3 or 4 guys you think of with the team.
He was just in an ad campaign they did for the movie Craven that came out a couple weeks ago. Like, to your point, Jake, they were doing like a Raven Craven thing. He was the face for the Ravens that was there.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on it and what that means for Justin Tucker. Last night we talked about at the Fieldhouse the fact it would not surprise me if we see some sort of a penalty, suspension, fine, whatever, regarding Isaiah Stewart for his mimicking of firing a gun or revolver at the Pacers bench on the way out. I certainly get the fact that, in childhood, that's the kind of thing kids do, whatever else, but it is in today's era with the NBA, would not surprise me if that results in some sort of a fine. Joining us now in the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, he is our friend from goldenblack.com, and of course, covering Purdue athletics, big one for the Boilers taking on Indiana tomorrow night at Mackey Arena. Brian Newbert joins us. Brian, I'll begin with this. If you were to look at right now the way that Purdue is playing and do it on, say, some sort of a grid, with the ceiling of the grid being the best basketball they've played this year, how close to that point are they? Or are they actually right now playing their best ball?
Yeah, I think when you look at the last 7.5 games, Jake, I think they're pretty close to their ceiling. I think that second half against Ohio State was the sort of cratering that nobody saw coming, but it was Purdue's 4th of 5 straight 3-day turnarounds. It came 3 days after Purdue returned from the Pacific Northwest, and I think that was a huge part of Purdue just kind of fading in that second half, whether people want to admit it or not or say it publicly or not. I think that was the game. But no, other than that, the 7.5 games around that one, I think Purdue's pretty close to its ceiling. I think it can rebound better. I think it can be more consistent shooting the ball. I think it can be a little more consistent at the foul line, things like that. But what they've done defensively, on top of still being a really good offensive team, has just really completed this group, and they're definitely playing at a Big Ten championship level here. And now they get a little break here to catch their breath a little bit, rest up a little bit, and maybe their best basketball is ahead of them even. Purdue's played 2 more games than Michigan State already and just came out of the most grueling part of its schedule from a logistics perspective. And, now maybe those kind of things catch up to other people in the league, and Purdue's able to kind of keep up its winning, but also benefit from, other teams in the league having to go through their schedule strife.
We had a conversation yesterday, Brian Newbert, our guest. We had a conversation yesterday with Mike DeCourcy, who, said very good things, obviously, about the job Matt Painter's done, and said that one thing that he thinks might be the governor right now on Purdue's accelerator is to get to, say, next level. It would be Miles Colvin and Cam Heide that just need to find the consistency from a minutes and contribution standpoint, night in and night out. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think they're playing better than their shooting numbers, and I think people look at the shooting numbers and kind of conflate that with them not playing well, but they're doing a lot of things pretty defensively that have really helped Purdue become, according to the data here, according to the outcomes, the best defensive team in Big Ten play here in the league, which is mind-boggling considering this has been a program that's won with offense for years now. Those guys' versatility and Miles Colvin's pressure on the ball, along with C.J. Cox and Sha'Carri Harris, have really been a big deal for Purdue. But if they're able to make open threes and get out in transition, a little more consistently than they've been lately, that would really just give Purdue another layer of offensive productivity that they may or may not even need right now the way they're playing. But it would certainly capitalize things a little bit more, maximize things a little bit more in terms of this team's potential.
Brian Newbert with us, covers Purdue for goldandblack.com. He's with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Brian, Matt Painter, as I would expect nothing less of him, very complimentary towards Indiana when discussing the matchup, said you're always going to get their best effort. You always prepare for somebody's best. I look at Indiana and I don't necessarily see a, Jalen Hood-Schifino or a Trace Jackson-Davis that takes over a game in Mackey and they suddenly have this signature win. When you look at Indiana compared to the strengths of Purdue and the weaknesses of the Boilermakers, does anything about the Hoosiers roster make you raise an eyebrow like, well, if they did that, maybe they have a chance tomorrow night?
Well, theoretically, this isn't Purdue's biggest team in a really stark kind of contrast from past seasons. Purdue is not the bigger team in every game they play in. That's been Purdue's reality for the better part of a decade now. They've had all these 7-footers. They don't have that this year. And so theoretically, they should be more vulnerable to teams with ultimate size than they have been. But Purdue's done a really good job doing to opponents what opponents have been trying to do to Purdue for all that time in terms of using opponents' size against them offensively, dragging them out away from the basket, putting them at ball screens and things like that, and really exposing them on defense while also playing hard enough and being smart enough to kind of overachieve on the glass and not get killed in the rebounding column. Michigan plays 2 7-footers next to one another, and they're different types of 7-footers, so it's not a apples-to-apples comparison. But when I look at Umar Ballo and Malik Renaud and what those guys can do just in terms of the physicality of it, that's something that Purdue, again, in theory, should be a little bit vulnerable against. But Caleb First has really helped Purdue from the perspective of Purdue having 2 kind of interchangeable big forwards instead of that one singular, Statue of Liberty under the basket. And that's really helped them against those matchups. But I think just if Purdue can rebound tomorrow night, keep Ballo off the offensive glass, keep Malik Renaud off the offensive glass and things like that, I think that's the one area where Purdue should be vulnerable. It just hasn't been because it's done a really good job offsetting its one, I don't want to say glaring, but what should be a vulnerability.
Purdue has only lost a single game since Christmas. That was against Ohio State at home. Seems like an anomaly, but they were coming off that Pacific Northwest trip, which was really good, where they beat Washington and Oregon, but then they come back, they lose that game, and then they turn around and they just eviscerate Michigan. Can we now say, Brian, that perhaps simply the fatigue of the travel was the factor in that game and that's good news for Indiana or for Purdue because they have the break now before they get Indiana?
Yeah, people, when I write that, want to call it an excuse, but I think the physical fatigue is one thing, but the mental fatigue is something else. And Purdue, as I said before, had 5 straight 3-day turnarounds. So when you get off a plane, remember they were at Rutgers a few days before they had to go out to the other coast. And the travel is one thing, but I think the mental fatigue is another. And just the constant coming back from somewhere and preparing for the next game that you play in 3 days, I think that takes a toll. And when you look at Purdue having played at a really, really high level for 7 games prior, just all of a sudden turning into a pumpkin at halftime, it just didn't make any sense. And, Purdue has been a much better defensive team than the one that gave up 45 points in the second half of that game. And I think, part of this too might be you're up 16 points late in the first half. And when you're a little bit tired physically, when you're a little bit tired mentally, maybe that perhaps it's human nature to just kind of let up on the gas a little bit. Credit to Ohio State for making shots at a level that they hadn't prior. But Purdue wasn't Purdue in that half. And there's really only one realistic explanation for that, in my opinion. I think Purdue has a good problem to have in that they are a prime TV product right now. TV wants to put them on in certain time slots because of what they've done the last few years, and that caught up with them. They had to play that game against Ohio State on a Tuesday night instead of a Wednesday night because of a TV preference. They had to play the Michigan game on Friday instead of Saturday when they had a whole week off thereafter because of TV and things like that. And that is a good problem to have, but it can be it can be a problem nonetheless. And I think it caught up with them there in the second half of that Ohio State game.
The place where you can read Brian Newbert is goldenblack.com. The place where you can follow Brian Newbert is at Brian Newbert. That's Neubert. Pretty good follow, too, because you get a little mix of music and sports and stuff like that on there. And the place where you can hear him occasionally, the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Brian, we will be looking for the coverage, and then after that, certainly enjoy the weekend, all right?
Thanks so much, fellas. You too.
All right, Brian Newbert joining us on Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. He is a fun follow because we got the same taste in music, I guess. Give me the musician, Jimmy, that the rest of the world loves and you just don't get it.
Oh,
Eddie, give me the musician the rest of the world loves and you just don't get it.
It's a good one. I don't know either.
Okay. Any country artist. I'm not a big country guy.
You know what I always say? A great name for a band would be Anything But Country. Just like if I ever opened a pizza place, it'd be called Anything But Anchovies. The most flawless.
Is that at the Gas and Gulp, or is that a separate property?
Excellent question. I don't know if we'll have pizza at the Gas and Gulp. But we're going to have the cleanest bathrooms, dip, fountain drinks, and combos. That's it. So I'm sticking by it. And then gas. The Gas and Gulp, I'm telling you, is $1 million idea.
By the way, Justin Tucker has released a statement. Unequivocally false is what he says.
Okay.
And it's nothing but tabloid fodder.
Obviously, you are innocent until proven guilty, right? There have been times, I'm sure. Can you imagine being falsely accused of something like that? I don't know that this is the case. I have no idea. I do think that there are a lot of, I would hope that the other outlets would vet that before they would run with what strictly kind of a gossip website, which I believe that I'm not in Baltimore, so I don't know the Baltimore Banner inside and out. But, I kind of last year started getting into country a little bit, country music.
What?
Just so you know, just a little bit. It reminds me of summer. Just reminds me of summer.
Yeah.
Like
my wife's favorite music is country. Like I don't cause a ruckus in the vehicle when it's on. I just don't. It's not on my iPod.
Mine would be I don't dislike, and I understand why people like it. So I'm not sitting here trying to be a hater. The Dave Matthews thing, though, to me, the fanaticism. To me, the sound. I know the guy's very, very talented, but it all kind of sounds the same to me. I just am like, yeah, that's like every song is like, it starts out with and then he just comes out and goes, hey. I don't know. It all sounds the same.
Hey.
Kind of, right? Tony East actually could probably do background singing for that, right?
No doubt about that.
Especially if it was hee-haw.
Yes, he'd be all over
Do you
it.
have plays of the day, Jimmy?
We got some.
All right, we will do the wildly popular and still to be available to be responsored Jimmy's plays of the day next.
Today's plays of the day, a mix of college basketball and the NBA. We'll start first in the association. Timberwolves on the road against the Utah Jazz. I'll lay the 5.5 on Minnesota to cover the spread in Utah. In college basketball, both these plays involving the Big Ten. Illinois on the road against Nebraska. I'll lay the 3.5 on the Illini against the Cornhuskers. Last one for you Oregon and UCLA, a battle out west. Give me Mick Cronin's Bruins to win the money line over the Ducks. Eddie, any plays for you?
Nope.
Those are your plays of the day.
That's it?
That's all we got.
What'd you say about the Ducks?
I went with the Bruins. Little Pac-12, Big Ten, Pac-12 turned Big Ten showdown between those two. Or should I say, longtime Big Ten rival. Storied history in the Big Ten Conference of UCLA versus Oregon.
Telling you, man. I still get a kick out of the whole, like, we're going to complain about the travel. Is this news to anybody?
I don't know why that rant still made me laugh. Maybe I'm on the wrong side of history with that, but
you know what was on
about
yesterday?
An angry coach that'll make me chuckle for silly arguments.
When I got home yesterday, you know what was on television?
Shawshank.
Judge Judy?
Well, that too.
Or Judy Justice. Have you seen that?
I didn't know what Boo was into right now, so that's why I went with Judge Judy.
Have you seen that? So they have a split between the rights to Judge Judy. So occasionally, if you have ABC or CBS on, one will have Judy Justice, which is apparently her more modern work, and then one will have the old reruns of Judge Judy. Sometimes they're in the same time block.
So wait a minute.
The more you know.
And one is newer, you said?
Yeah. So like there was apparently, this is the rabbit holes I fall under sometimes, or fall down rather. There was a split between her distributor, and so they had the rights to the name Judge Judy. So now it's Judy Justice. Gotcha.
Okay.
But they're still airing Judge Judy in syndication on the other network.
You know, when I get home, so, you know, I flip through the channels, and we were talking yesterday about, like, just the save, you know, that, like, oh, there's nothing on, so this is on, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
I've noticed certain networks just have marathons of shows. They just plug it in for 4 hours and walk away. When I was in Europe, for example, the MTV variation you got over there, the only English-speaking show that we got was Ridiculousness. Have you seen that? It's just
Heard of it. Haven't seen it in a while.
It's just some guy that wears Air Max and
Rob Dyrdek.
Huh?
Rob Dyrdek.
Look at Eddie. The quick draw on that.
And then it's Eminem's daughter. That's the female that's on there.
He just plays like YouTube clips and TikTok videos of people like falling off skateboards and stuff.
Yeah, doing ridiculous or embarrassing stuff. Yeah,
and he says you're watching ridiculousness. He said, and then they have one girl that just laughs at everything.
That is Eminem's daughter.
Are you sure?
100%.
Is she like Latina?
I do not know.
No, she's the girl, and she laughs and she goes.
Yeah, that's his daughter.
Is it
Eminem's
really?
daughter. Yeah.
Okay. So at any rate,
we spun off Tosh.0 and put it on MTV and
that's
put
kind
more
of
celebrities
the same,
on it.
yes.
That's basically what we did. Okay.
So, but if that's not on, then that Catfish is on, right? And you've seen the show Catfish, right? I looked this up the other day. You know, there's not been a single couple on Catfish that stay together.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Not one.
Man.
And then there's one fellow, and he seems a little off. I've watched on a snowy day, I've watched a few marathons of Catfish, and I'm not afraid to admit it. But there's one fellow on there that was on there because he got catfished, and then like he got catfished a second time, and then a year later he was catfishing somebody.
You learn the art, and then you go and deal.
And
it
I
out.
thought, now this starts. Now we're getting into like I don't know, mental health challenges, perhaps.
The master has become the apprentice in that scenario.
Seems a little bit odd, yes. J&V has arrived, coming off the Pacers' win last night at the Fieldhouse against the Pistons, where there were some fisticuffs, but
J.B. Bickerstaff's a jackass too, isn't he?
He's got a bickering
staff. He leads a
staff.
bunch of jackasses. He's like the lead jackass.
He was. They were fired up last night, man, and I think there's probably going to be some repercussion for that.
I think that that's what he instills. He's on the sideline, and
yes.
Man, he's like, I heard you mention Tyler Ford, and I stopped making fun of Tyler Ford. I used to call him a pipsqueak, and then I found out he listened to the show all the time. I felt bad.
Yeah, because he lives right here, right in town.
Yeah, the pipsqueak lives in Westfield. I don't call him that anymore. He's a pretty decent dude from what. Even though I like to make fun of NBA officials.
By the way, his neighbors sit next to us.
Yeah.
And at one point last night, and you tell me if I should be threatened by this, and they're very nice people, but the woman that sits next to us asked me about the tickets and then said, "Yeah, we've been trying to buy these tickets from you,
really?
or from the Pacers. Like we offered to pay more for these tickets."
But he is
not him, but this couple, and I thought, well, and they're neighbors to him.
I've not met him. Evidently, David George, mutual friend of ours, says he's a really nice guy and he listens. So
I guess DeForest Buckner lives down the street from him.
Does he?
Because this couple next to us that's trying to buy the tickets.
So tell me the story with the two hysterics nerds. What do they do?
I don't think I'm supposed to play it again. They didn't like the Isaiah Thomas interview, which that's a fair critique, and thought that I should have been more pushback with Isaiah. But they said that I had no balls and I'm spineless and I'm a jellyfish. Really? Yeah.
So what? So where have they started with the hard? I mean, they just like me. They had Brian Evans on and turned him loose. It's not like they're going hardcore journalism either, right? I don't have anything against them. I thought they were really nerdy, and I don't think they would feel this way right now if Mike Woodson hadn't turned on them, right?
Well, that's
correct.
correct.
What's more interesting is I know that one of the guys that gives a lot of money that's friends with theirs is a really good friend of mine that I played basketball with last week. His name's Mike Ross. I actually just texted him, and I said, so those hysterics nerds, are they a friend of yours? And he said, yeah, I know him really well. So he's a big donor down there. Has been a significant donor down there. So we're going to have to straighten their ass out a little bit here.
My only thing is this, and you know, he kind of tried to play the big time of like he didn't know what this show was or who he is, and I'm like, I talked to him on the phone once for 20 minutes when he was begging to come on the show to promote a fundraiser he was doing to raise a bunch of money, and I appreciate that he's raised a bunch of NIL money for them, but at the same time, I did have to think to myself or ask myself, how just overly abrasive or annoying do you have to be to bring a program millions of dollars and still get banned? Right?
Well, because they had Brian on. Like, you got the call regarding Isaiah Thomas. You got calls I didn't get because I had Brian Evans on.
Right.
That's why. So I'm ostracized from.
I don't know. I mean, are you? I don't know.
I know for sure. I know. And it's okay. I mean, Brian, I let people speak their mind. He's somebody that has a voice.
I mean, Evans has come on here too, right?
Yeah, he's been essential in the program. He's played at a high level, made himself into something as a basketball player, and I think everybody respects that. I would explain to them that it's not like that they're too far gone from sniffing everybody's rear end down there, and probably should be quiet.
Right. Well, that's what I mean.
I mean, honestly.
Listen,
I mean, about you. Right? So
I don't know. I mean, listen, like I said, if I'm going to have on people so that I can critique the job performance of, say, a coach, it is only fair that the job performance that I, in terms of my execution of said interviews, be critiqued. I get that. That's fine. That's fair. To say that I've been through too much, though, and I've not had a hard life at all, but professionally speaking, I've been through some ups and downs. To say that I have no spine is disingenuous.
Spitballing, Jake. It's just like what I'm doing right now. It's spitballing.
Yeah, I mean, you got to work with
say something in the moment.
True.
I'm sure if they met you and talked to you, they wouldn't. Or if I had the chance to explain
he
to
met
them
me because he was begging to come on the show, and I decided that I didn't think that we could do that. And that's probably
he called. I think he was running for. Was he running for the school board down
there? He did at one point.
The board of trustees.
He did at one point.
He was trying to get on there or whatever. I don't have anything against him. I just think it's now they're just all pissed off because they've been ostracized from any part of the program. So I don't think you have anything to do with that.
No.
So, yes, right. So Mike Woodson's people were calling around. They didn't call me. Did they call Kevin and Swebo in the morning about coming on?
I don't know. It was not somebody.
And this is.
I didn't get called from IU.
This is all a bunch of BS. This is all evidence of why this is going down a path where change needs to be made. All right? We're not seeing things. We're not making things up. You're not. All right? This needs to be changed.
Give it a couple months. We'll get there.
Yeah. And he'll, I'm sure, retire, and that'll be that, right? That's how that's going to end.
I would agree with that. And I would agree with that totally, right?
But, yeah. We can't have that. I said we cannot have these two nerds getting on Jay Query. They may be nice guys. I'm not sure. I think Jeremiah Johnson went to school with one of them. One
Correct.
of the nerds.
The more quiet of the two. Not the one
the
that
director.
The one that talks like Ken
Scorsese
Sterling.
Jr.
The other one, the other one talks like Ken Sterling. All right,
Great.
John's up next.
That's what I want to hear right there.
John is going to be unique and organic, and he's going to do so until 6 o'clock. And we will be back with you at noon tomorrow. Thanks for listening to Query & Company.